Welcome, true believers, to a journey through one of the most profound transformations in all of human storytelling. Tonight, we're going to explore the moment that changed everything. A single bite from a radioactive spider that rewrote the destiny of a 15-year-old boy and created a legend that would inspire generations. This is the story of Peter Parker's transformation, from an invisible, overlooked teenager into someone who had come to understand that with great power comes great responsibility. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Spider-Man's origin, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that notification bell so you never miss our next sleep documentary. Your support helps us create more of these calming journeys through the stories you love. So settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind drift back to a simpler time, to the streets of Queens, New York, where science and fate collided in the most extraordinary way. We'll move gently through each moment of discovery, each realization, each choice that shaped the hero we know and love. There's no rush here, no need to remember every scientific detail or every exact moment. Just let the story carry you like a gentle current, washing over you with the warmth of a tale well told. This is a story about transformation, about the moment when everything changes, and about learning what it truly means to be responsible for the gifts we're given. Our story begins not with powers or costumes or dramatic battles, but with something much more fundamental. It begins with love. The kind of quiet, steady love that builds character and shapes souls. In a modest house on a tree-lined street in Queens, New York, a young boy named Peter Benjamin Parker is being raised by two people who will define his understanding of goodness, responsibility, and what it means to live a life of purpose. Peter's parents, Richard and Mary Parker, died when he was so young that he carries only the faintest impressions of them. A warm laugh, gentle hands, the feeling of safety, but nothing concrete enough to hold on to when the loneliness comes. The circumstances of their deaths remain shrouded in mystery and pain, a topic that Aunt May and Uncle Ben approach with careful gentleness whenever young Peter asks about them. What Peter knows, what he feels in his bones, is that he was loved by his parents and that when they could no longer care for him, they left him with people who would love him just as fiercely. Ben Parker, Peter's uncle, is the kind of man who fixes neighbours' broken appliances without being asked and never sends a bill. His hands are calloused from honest work, his face lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from smiling more than frowning. Ben works various jobs throughout Peter's childhood, none of them glamorous. All of them performed with dignity and dedication. He's a security guard, a handyman, a driver, whatever is needed to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. But his real work, his life's greatest accomplishment, is raising Peter with values that will outlast any paycheck. May Parker, Ben's wife and Peter's aunt, possesses a strength that could easily be mistaken for fragility. She's a small woman with silver hair that she wears in a neat bun, hands that are never idle, and a heart that seems to have infinite capacity for worry and infinite capacity for love existing side by side. She tends her garden with the same careful attention she gives to Peter's well-being, nurturing growth, pulling weeds, making sure that everything has what it needs to flourish. Her kitchen always smells of something baking. Her voice always carries a note of gentle concern, and her faith in Peter's goodness never wavers, even when he gives her reason to doubt. The house on Ingram Street is small but filled with warmth. The living room furniture is old but comfortable, chosen for durability rather than style. The walls are covered with photographs that tell the story of their little family. Peter, at various ages, always with that serious, thoughtful expression that suggests a mind working on problems more complex than childhood should require. May's garden visible through the back window, a riot of colour in spring and summer, a study in patience during winter months. Ben's workshop in the basement cluttered with tools and half-finished projects, where he teaches Peter that fixing things is about more than mechanical skill. It's about the patience to understand how things work and the dedication to make them whole again. Peter's room is a child's laboratory and library combined. Even at 8, 9, 10 years old, he collects science magazines with the fervour other boys collect baseball cards. His shelves hold books about chemistry, physics, astronomy, subjects that most children his age find intimidating or boring. But Peter reads them the way other kids read adventure stories, finding wonder in the elegant laws that govern the universe and excitement in the possibility that understanding these laws might allow someone to do something extraordinary. The neighbourhood around the Parker house is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, where people sit on their front porches on summer evenings and wave to passing neighbours, where kids play stickball in the street until the streetlights come on. It's a community built on modest means and shared values, where people help each other without keeping score, and where being a good neighbour is considered as important as any professional achievement. Ben and May raise Peter with a philosophy that emphasises character over accomplishment, kindness over cleverness, doing what's right over doing what's easy. They teach him these lessons not through lectures or punishment, but through example and gentle guidance. When Peter comes home upset because other children have excluded him from their games, Ben doesn't tell him to fight back or to stop caring. Instead, he sits with Peter on the front steps and talks about how being different isn't the same as being wrong, how intelligence is a gift that should be used to help others rather than to feel superior to them. May teaches Peter about compassion through her interactions with neighbours who are struggling. She brings casseroles to families dealing with illness, watches children for parents who are working extra shifts, offers her home as a safe haven for anyone who needs it. Peter watches his aunt extend grace and help without judgment, and he learns that taking care of others is not a burden, but a privilege. He sees how her small acts of kindness create ripples that spread through the community, making life a little easier for everyone. The financial struggles that shadow the Parker household are never discussed directly in front of Peter, but he's perceptive enough to notice. He sees how carefully May plans meals to stretch the grocery budget, how Ben's face looks when bills arrive in the mail, how his own requests for new things are met with gentle explanations about waiting and saving. These observations don't make Peter feel deprived. They make him grateful for what he has and conscious of the sacrifices his aunt and uncle make to provide it. School is where Peter's difference from other children becomes most apparent and most painful. His intelligence, which Ben and May celebrate and nurture at home, becomes a source of isolation among his peers. He finishes assignments faster than other students, understands concepts that confuse his classmates, asks questions that go beyond what the teachers are prepared to answer. This should make him popular, or at least respected, but instead, it makes him an outsider. The other children don't understand him, and what we don't understand we often reject or mock. Peter learns to make himself smaller in social situations, to hide his intelligence behind silence, to avoid drawing attention that might lead to ridicule or exclusion. He develops the habit of reading during recess rather than attempting to join games where he's not wanted, of eating lunch quickly and quietly rather than navigating the complex social dynamics of the cafeteria. His teachers recognise his potential and encourage his academic interests, but they can't protect him from the loneliness that comes from being fundamentally different from the people around him. Yet through all of this, through the isolation and the struggle to fit in, and the awareness that his family has less money than many of his classmates' families, Peter remains fundamentally hopeful and kind. Ben and May's influence creates in him a bedrock of decency that will withstand tests far greater than childhood bullying. He learns to find joy in small things, to take satisfaction from understanding how the world works, to believe that being good matters even when goodness isn't rewarded or recognised. The bond between Peter and his aunt and uncle deepens through shared experiences and quiet moments. Evening walks with Uncle Ben where they discuss everything from science to ethics. Sunday mornings helping Aunt May in the garden and learning that patience and nurture produce growth that can't be rushed. Dinners around the small kitchen table where they share the details of their days, and Peter feels seen and valued in ways he doesn't experience anywhere else. These moments are creating in Peter a foundation of love and security that will sustain him through unimaginable challenges to come. As Peter approaches his teenage years, the values that Ben and May have instilled begin to crystallize into a coherent worldview. He understands that intelligence without compassion is empty, that strength without responsibility is dangerous, that the measure of a person is found not in what they have or what they can do, but in how they choose to treat others, especially those who have less power than they do. These lessons are seeds planted in fertile soil, waiting for the right circumstances to bloom into something extraordinary. The world that Peter knows before the spider bite is small but rich with meaning. It's a world where goodness is possible, where love is real, where an ordinary boy with an extraordinary mind can find acceptance and purpose. It's a world built on the foundation of two people who chose to see raising a nephew not as an obligation, but as their life's greatest calling. And it's a world that is about to change forever in ways that none of them can possibly imagine, but that will test everything Ben and May have taught Peter about power, responsibility, and what it means to be a hero. The transition from childhood to adolescence brings with it a particular kind of vulnerability, a heightened awareness of how we're perceived by others, and a desperate desire to belong. For Peter Parker, entering Midtown High School at 14 years old means stepping into an environment where his differences become even more pronounced, and the social costs of being brilliant but awkward become painfully clear. Midtown High School sits in the heart of Queens, a sprawling brick building that has educated generations of young people from the neighborhood. Its hallways echo with the sounds of locker doors slamming, hundreds of conversations happening simultaneously, the shuffle of feet moving between classes. To most students, it's simply the place they spend their weekdays, enduring classes and navigating social hierarchies until they can escape to freedom. To Peter, it represents both opportunity and ordeal, a place where his mind can soar in science classes while his spirit withers under the weight of social rejection. The academic side of high school comes easily to Peter, almost too easily. In chemistry class, he understands molecular structures and chemical reactions with an intuitive grasp that impresses and slightly intimidates his teachers. Physics makes perfect sense to him, the elegant mathematics describing motion and force and energy feeling as natural as breathing. Biology fascinates him with its complexity, the intricate systems that allow life to exist and flourish. He sits in the front row of his science classes, hand raised to answer questions that stump his classmates, staying after the bell rings to discuss concepts that go beyond the curriculum. His teachers recognize his potential and encourage it with varying degrees of skill and enthusiasm. Some see in Peter the kind of student they dreamed of teaching when they entered the profession, a young mind genuinely hungry for knowledge rather than just grades. They lend him advanced textbooks, suggest experiments he can try at home with Uncle Ben's help, write letters of recommendation for science programs and competitions. Others find his intensity somewhat unsettling, worried that he's too focused on academics at the expense of developing social skills and having a normal teenage experience. But it's the social landscape of high school that proves treacherous for Peter. The same intelligence that makes him excel in the classroom marks him as different, as someone who doesn't fit into the established categories that teenagers use to organize their world. He's not an athlete, not popular, not cool in any of the ways that high school culture values. He's the class brain, the nerd, the easy target for students looking to establish their own status by diminishing someone else's. Flash Thompson embodies everything that high school Peter is not, and everything that high school culture celebrates. Eugene Thompson, called Flash by everyone who knows him, is tall where Peter is average height, muscular where Peter is thin, confident where Peter is uncertain. He's the star of the football team, surrounded by friends who laugh at his jokes and follow his lead, admired by girls who see in his athletic prowess and easy charm the epitome of teenage masculinity. Flash's locker is in the same hallway as Peter's, a proximity that guarantees regular encounters that Peter would much rather avoid. The bullying starts small, as these things often do. A mocking comment about Peter's clothes, which are clean but clearly less expensive than what the popular kids wear. A shove in the hallway that's just forceful enough to be aggressive, but subtle enough to be dismissed as an accident if a teacher notices. Laughter at Peter's expense when he answers a question in class with the kind of detailed, thoughtful response that demonstrates his knowledge, but also his inability to read the room and understand that showing off your intelligence makes you a target. Flash doesn't bully Peter out of any particular malice or deep-seated psychological need. He does it because it's easy, because Peter provides a reliable source of entertainment for Flash's audience, because high school social dynamics reward this kind of casual cruelty and punish those who refuse to participate. He calls Peter Puny Parker with a grin that suggests he thinks he's been clever rather than cruel. He trips Peter in the cafeteria, knocks books out of his hands in the hallway, makes jokes about Peter's lack of athletic ability or social skills that get laughs from the crowd that always seems to surround him. Peter's response to this treatment is to make himself smaller, quieter, less visible. He learns Flash's schedule and takes routes through the school that minimize their encounters. He eats lunch quickly in the library rather than the cafeteria where Flash holds court. He keeps his head down in the hallways, avoiding eye contact that might be interpreted as a challenge or an invitation for mockery. Uncle Ben's lessons about not responding to violence with violence, about being the bigger person, about character mattering more than popularity. These teachings help Peter endure the bullying without retaliating, but they don't make it hurt any less. The isolation that comes with being simultaneously too smart and not athletic enough creates a lonely existence for Peter. While other students are forming friendships, going to parties, having the kinds of social experiences that define the teenage years, Peter spends his time alone with his books and his experiments. His weekends are spent in Uncle Ben's basement workshop, helping with repair projects or conducting his own scientific investigations. His evenings are filled with homework that takes him far less time than it should, leaving long hours to fill with reading or simply thinking. There are moments when Peter catches glimpses of the social world he's excluded from and feels the sharp sting of longing. He sees groups of students laughing together in the hallway and wonders what it would feel like to have friends like that. He overhears conversations about parties and dances and feels a mix of relief that he wasn't invited and sadness that he wasn't even considered. He watches Flash Thompson surrounded by admirers and understands with painful clarity that the qualities that make someone popular in high school have nothing to do with intelligence or kindness or any of the values that Uncle Ben and Aunt May have taught him to prioritize. The girls at Midtown High exist in Peter's awareness as distant, mysterious beings whose attention he craves but has no idea how to attract. There's a girl in his chemistry class with dark hair and a quick smile who sometimes asks to borrow his notes, and Peter's heart races every time she speaks to him, even though he knows it's his academic usefulness rather than his personal appeal that motivates her friendliness. There's another girl, blonde and athletic, who Peter sees in the hallways and watches from afar with a kind of hopeless longing that teenagers specialize in, knowing that someone like her would never notice someone like him. His teacher's recognition of his abilities provides some compensation for his social struggles, but it's a cold comfort compared to the warmth of genuine friendship or romantic connection. When his chemistry teacher praises his work in front of the class, Peter feels a moment of pride that's immediately undercut by the eye rolls and dismissive comments from his classmates. When he wins a spot in the regional science fair, it's an achievement that matters to him and to Uncle Ben and Aunt May, but it does nothing to improve his standing among his peers. The weight of being different, of being smart in an environment that doesn't always value intelligence, of being kind in a social ecosystem that often rewards cruelty, begins to accumulate on Peter's shoulders during these high school years. He develops the hunched posture of someone who's learned to expect verbal or physical attacks and wants to present a smaller target. He speaks quietly, tentatively, always aware that drawing attention to himself might result in mockery or worse. His natural enthusiasm for learning gets hidden behind a mask of studied indifference, a protective colouring that he hopes will help him blend in even though it never quite works. Yet through all of this, the foundation that Ben and May have built continues to hold. Peter doesn't become bitter or cruel in response to his mistreatment. He doesn't lash out at others or seek to create the kind of pain he's experiencing. He remains fundamentally decent, helping classmates with homework even when they've been unkind to him, treating everyone with a respect that's rarely returned. Holding on to the belief that doing the right thing matters even when the right thing goes unnoticed and unrewarded, Uncle Ben remains Peter's greatest source of wisdom and comfort during these difficult years. Their evening walks continue, conversations ranging across topics that help Peter make sense of his experiences. Ben never tells Peter that the bullying doesn't matter or that he should just ignore it. Instead, he acknowledges the pain while also providing perspective. He talks about how high school is a temporary situation, how the qualities that make Peter an outsider now will make him successful and respected later in life, how Flash Thompson's popularity is built on a foundation that won't sustain him in the real world. More importantly, Ben teaches Peter about the kind of man he should aspire to become, lessons that have nothing to do with physical strength or social status, and everything to do with character and conscience. He tells Peter that the true measure of a person is how they treat those who can't fight back, how they act when no one is watching, how they respond to power when they finally acquire it. These conversations plant seeds that will bloom in ways neither of them can anticipate, creating a moral framework that will guide Peter through decisions far more consequential than anything high school can throw at him. Aunt May's approach to supporting Peter through his adolescent struggles is different but equally important. She notices when he comes home with torn clothes or bruised ribs and doesn't press him for details he's reluctant to provide. She makes his favourite meals when she senses he's had a particularly difficult day, her cooking a form of love that requires no words. She talks to him about patience, about how the people who matter will eventually recognise his worth, about how being different isn't the same as being wrong. The nights when Peter lies in his bed staring at the ceiling, wondering why he has to be so different, why he can't just be normal enough to fit in, why the universe made him smart but forgot to make him cool. These nights are long and lonely. The temptation to wish away his intelligence, to be less observant, less curious, less aware of the complexity of the world, surfaces during these dark hours. But in the morning, when he wakes and returns to his books and his experiments, he finds that he can't imagine being anyone other than who he is, even if who he is makes life harder than it needs to be. The science fiction and comic books that Peter reads during this period provide escape and inspiration in equal measure. He devours stories about ordinary people who discover they have extraordinary abilities, who use those abilities to help others, who become heroes despite starting out as outsiders and underdogs. These stories speak to something deep in Peter's soul, a longing not just to escape his current circumstances, but to transcend them, to become someone who matters, someone who makes a difference, someone whose value is undeniable. As Peter approaches his 15th birthday, he exists in a state of suspended possibility, a bright mind trapped in circumstances that don't allow that brightness to shine in ways that bring social rewards. He's learned to endure, to survive, to maintain his essential decency despite being surrounded by people who mistake that decency for weakness. He carries within him all the lessons that Ben and May have taught him about responsibility, kindness, and doing what's right, even as he struggles to see how those lessons will ever translate into a life that feels meaningful or valued. The ordinary concerns of teenage life consume his daily attention, worrying about the next test, avoiding Flash Thompson in the hallways, wondering if he'll ever have the courage to speak to a girl he likes. He has no way of knowing that his life is about to change in ways that will make all of these concerns seem trivial in retrospect. He doesn't know that a field trip to a science demonstration is going to alter the fundamental nature of his existence, that a single spider bite will transform him from invisible to extraordinary, that the question of how to use power responsibly is about to become the central challenge of his entire life. For now, Peter Parker is just a 15-year-old boy trying to navigate the treacherous waters of high school with his dignity and his values intact. He's someone who is overlooked by his peers, underestimated by almost everyone except his aunt and uncle, unaware of the potential that lives inside him waiting for the right catalyst to unlock it. The story of his transformation hasn't begun yet, but all the pieces are in place, all the lessons have been learned, all the character has been built. He's ready, though he doesn't know it, for everything to change. The field trip that will change Peter Parker's life forever begins as an ordinary Tuesday in November. The kind of grey autumn day when the air carries a hint of the winter to come, and students shuffle into school bundled in jackets they'll shed by lunchtime. Peter's science class has been looking forward to this excursion for weeks. A demonstration of cutting-edge atomic research at a local university laboratory. The kind of opportunity that makes Peter's heart race with anticipation, while most of his classmates view it as a welcome break from regular classroom routine. The bus ride to the university gives Peter a chance to sit alone near the front, his preferred position that allows him to avoid the social dynamics playing out in the back rows where Flash Thompson and his friends trade jokes and gossip. He stares out the window watching Queens pass by, his mind already racing ahead to what he might see at the demonstration. Uncle Ben had talked with him the night before about the peaceful applications of atomic energy. The promise of using controlled radiation to cure diseases and solve problems that have plagued humanity for generations. The conversation had filled Peter with the kind of excitement that only the prospect of witnessing real science in action can create. The university building where the demonstration will take place is modern and imposing. All glass and steel and the kind of architectural confidence that suggests important work happens within its walls. The students file in with varying degrees of interest, some genuinely curious, most simply glad to be out of school for a few hours. Peter finds himself near the middle of the group as they're led into a large lecture hall where the demonstration has been set up. Rows of equipment and specimens arranged to showcase the various applications of radioactive research. Dr. Curtis Connors stands at the front of the room, a tall man with sandy hair and an earnest manner that immediately puts Peter at ease. There's something missing about Connors that Peter notices immediately. The scientist's right sleeve is pinned up at the shoulder, the arm lost in some accident that he doesn't explain. But his passion for his work is evident in every word he speaks as he begins the demonstration, describing how controlled exposure to radioactive isotopes can accelerate healing, enhance growth, unlock potential that exists dormant in living tissue. The lecture hall itself is filled with the quiet hum of scientific equipment, monitors displaying data that Peter wishes he could examine more closely, containment vessels holding various specimens being studied for their responses to radiation exposure. The lighting is bright and clinical, everything designed for observation and precision. Peter leans forward in his seat, absorbing every word. While around him, other students fidget or whisper, or simply wait for the demonstration to end so they can move on to whatever comes next. Dr. Connors explains the careful safety protocols that make this research possible, the shielding that protects researchers from harmful exposure, the precise measurements that ensure radiation is applied in controlled doses that enhance rather than harm. He speaks about the dream of regenerating lost limbs, of curing cancer, of unlocking the healing potential that exists within human DNA if only we can learn to safely activate it. Peter finds himself thinking about Connor's missing arm and wondering if the scientist's passion for this research is driven by personal hope as much as professional curiosity. Behind Dr. Connors, arranged on tables and in carefully sealed containers, various experiments showcase the effects of radioactive exposure on living tissue. Plants growing at accelerated rates under controlled radiation, their leaves larger and greener than normal specimens. Mice that have demonstrated enhanced healing after receiving measured doses of specific isotopes. And in a small glass enclosure, barely noticed by anyone except Peter, whose eyes catalogue every detail of the demonstration, a spider that glows with a faint, eerie luminescence. The spider is unremarkable in most ways, no larger than a pencil eraser, its body the typical shape and structure of the common house spider that might be found in any basement or garage. But the exposure to radioactive rays has changed it at a cellular level, altering its DNA in ways that the researchers are still working to understand. It sits in its small container, seemingly no different from any other spider except for that strange glow. The visible evidence of the atomic transformation it has undergone. The enclosure is supposed to be sealed, a safety measure to prevent the specimen from escaping and potentially causing problems. But in the bustle of setting up the demonstration, in the focus on the larger, more impressive experiments, someone has failed to properly secure the container's lid. As Dr. Connors continues his lecture, moving from specimen to specimen and explaining the careful science behind each experiment, the radioactive spider begins to move. It explores the edges of its container with the patient, methodical approach that spiders employ when investigating their environment. It finds the gap where the lid doesn't quite meet the base, a space barely wide enough for its small body to squeeze through. Driven by instinct, or perhaps by some change in behaviour caused by its radioactive transformation, the spider begins to escape. The descent is slow and almost hypnotic, the spider lowering itself on an invisible thread of webbing, spinning out silk as it drops through the air. The students in the lecture hall are focused on Dr. Connors or on their own private conversations. No one notices the tiny creature making its way down from the demonstration table toward the seated audience. It descends through beams of light from the overhead fixtures, the radiation in its body making it glow faintly in the brightness. A detail that would be fascinating if anyone were paying attention. Peter sits in the middle of the classroom, only half listening to the lecture despite his earlier enthusiasm. His mind has begun to wander as it often does, thinking about the homework he needs to finish tonight, the chemistry experiment he wants to try in Uncle Ben's workshop, the complex relationship between atomic structure and biological function. He's examining his own hand, looking at the lines on his palm and the unique patterns of his fingerprints, wondering about the genetic code that creates such individuality, when he feels a small, sharp pain on the back of his right hand. Looking down, Peter sees the spider, its body glowing with that strange radioactive light, its fangs embedded in his skin. The pain is immediate and intense. Far worse than any normal spider bite should be. It's a burning sensation that seems to spread from the point of contact, racing up through his hand and into his arm with alarming speed. Peter's first instinct is to brush the spider away, which he does with a sharp motion that sends the small creature tumbling to the floor where it curls up, apparently dying from the effort of delivering its venom into Peter's bloodstream. The bite site on Peter's hand is already beginning to swell, a small red welt that throbs with heat. The pain intensifies rather than fading, a burning ache that seems to pulse with his heartbeat. Peter feels dizzy and nauseous, his vision blurring at the edges. Sweat breaks out on his forehead despite the comfortable temperature of the lecture hall. His first thought is to raise his hand and tell Dr. Connors what's happened, to get medical attention, to do something to address the situation. But his natural reluctance to draw attention to himself, combined with the confusion and disorientation that's beginning to cloud his thinking, keeps him silent and seated. Around him, his classmates remain oblivious to what's just occurred. To them, Peter looks exactly as he always does, pale and slightly uncomfortable, lost in his own thoughts. Flash Thompson might glance in his direction and see nothing worth commenting on. The teacher chaperoning the field trip is watching Dr. Connors' presentation. No one notices that Peter's hands are trembling slightly as he grips the edge of his chair, that his breathing has become shallow and rapid, that his skin has taken on a greyish pallor that suggests something is seriously wrong. The radioactive venom is beginning its work, spreading through Peter's bloodstream and binding to his DNA in ways that shouldn't be possible according to everything science understands about genetics and cellular function. The spider's bite isn't just injecting toxin, it's rewriting the fundamental code that determines what Peter Parker is at a biological level. The radiation that transformed the spider is now transforming Peter, altering his genetic structure to incorporate characteristics of the arachnid that bit him. The process is agonizing, but also frighteningly fast, changes occurring at a molecular level that will reshape every system in his body. As Dr. Connors continues his lecture, explaining the careful calibration required to achieve beneficial effects from radiation exposure without causing harm, Peter experiences a cascade of symptoms that suggest his body is anything but carefully calibrated in its response to the radioactive spider's venom. The heat spreading through his arm has reached his chest now, making his heart race in a rhythm that feels irregular and concerning. His sense of touch has become hypersensitive, the fabric of his clothes feeling rough and intrusive against his skin. Colours seem to intensify and shift, the lecture hall's lighting becoming almost painfully bright. Strange sensations ripple through Peter's nervous system, feelings that have no easy description or comparison. It's as if he can suddenly sense the movement of everyone in the room, feel the vibrations of their breathing and heartbeats through the air. His own heartbeat thunders in his ears, so loud he wonders how the students sitting next to him can't hear it. The space between his thoughts seems to compress and expand randomly, moments of crystal clarity alternating with periods of profound confusion. Something fundamental is changing inside him, something that goes far beyond the simple allergic reaction to a spider bite that he's trying to convince himself is all that's happening. The lecture concludes with Dr. Connors inviting questions from the students, a few hands going up from the academically curious or those trying to impress their teacher. Peter, who would normally be eager to ask about the details of the radiation exposure process or the specific isotopes being used in the research, can barely focus on the words being spoken. He's consumed by the physical sensations coursing through his body, the growing awareness that something is terribly, irreversibly wrong. When the teacher announces it's time to return to the bus, Peter struggles to his feet, his legs feeling weak and unreliable beneath him. The walk from the lecture hall to the waiting bus becomes an ordeal that tests Peter's determination to appear normal and avoid drawing attention to himself. Each step requires conscious effort and concentration. His balance feels off, as if his inner ear can no longer accurately judge his position in space. The hallways of the university building seem to tilt and sway, though he knows rationally that the problem is with his perception rather than with reality. Other students flow around him, hurrying to claim their preferred seats on the bus, completely unaware that one of their classmates is struggling simply to remain upright and conscious. Flash Thompson, ever alert for opportunities to mock his favourite target, notices Peter's unsteady gait and makes a comment about Parker looking sick, suggesting that even a field trip to watch scientists is too exciting for someone as weak as Peter. The words barely register with Peter, who is too focused on putting one foot in front of the other to care about Flash's casual cruelty. He makes it to the bus and collapses into a seat near the front, his head leaning against the cool glass of the window, grateful for the small relief the temperature provides against his feverish skin. The ride back to Midtown High passes in a haze of discomfort and disorientation. Peter watches the streets of Queens blur past the window. Familiar landmarks made strange by his altered perception. Every bump in the road sends jolts of sensation through his hypersensitive nervous system. The conversations of his classmates sound too loud, individual words becoming impossible to separate from the general noise. He closes his eyes and tries to focus on breathing, on making it through the next few minutes, the next block, the next turn that will bring him closer to home and the safety of his room where he can collapse without worrying about maintaining the appearance of normalcy. When the bus finally returns to school and the students are dismissed for the day, Peter moves through the building like a ghost, barely aware of his surroundings. The walk home from Midtown High, normally a pleasant 20-minute journey through familiar streets that he's travelled countless times, becomes a marathon of endurance. He has to stop repeatedly, leaning against lampposts and mailboxes, waiting for waves of dizziness to pass. His clothes feel wrong against his skin, the fabric scratching and pulling in ways that make him want to tear them off. Colours continue to intensify, the autumn leaves on the trees glowing with shades of orange and red that seem almost supernatural in their vibrancy. The hypersensitivity of his senses creates an overwhelming flood of sensory input that his brain struggles to process. He can smell everything: the exhaust from passing cars, the flowers in window boxes, the food cooking in apartments he walks past, each scent distinct and almost overwhelming in its intensity. He can hear conversations from blocks away, the hum of electrical wires, the rustle of leaves, the heartbeats of dogs behind fences. The world has become almost unbearably vivid, every detail sharp and demanding attention. He finds himself noticing patterns and connections he's never seen before, the way shadows fall across sidewalks, the geometric precision of brick walls, the mathematical relationships in the spacing of streetlights. By the time Peter reaches the house on Ingram Street, he's barely able to climb the front steps. His key fumbles in the lock, his hands shaking too badly to guide it smoothly into place. Aunt May takes one look at his pale, sweating face when he finally gets the door open and immediately assumes he's coming down with the flu. Her concern is both comforting and frustrating. Peter wants to be taken care of, but he also doesn't want her to worry or to realise that this is something far worse than a simple virus. May helps him up to his room, her gentle hands guiding him up the stairs that feel like they're moving beneath his feet. She brings him aspirin and soup, insists that he rest, and promises that he'll feel better soon. Uncle Ben returns from work and pokes his head into Peter's room, offering quiet words of encouragement and the assurance that whatever bug Peter has caught will pass. Neither of them can know that what's happening to their nephew has nothing to do with illness in any conventional sense, that the changes taking place in his body are permanent and profound and will alter the course of his entire life. That night, as Peter lies in his bed trying to sleep, the transformation accelerates. His body temperature fluctuates wildly, chills so intense they make his teeth chatter, alternating with fever that soaks his sheets with sweat. Strange dreams fill the brief periods when he manages to doze, visions of webs and walls, of crawling and climbing in ways that human beings aren't supposed to move. He dreams of seeing the world from impossible angles, hanging upside down from ceilings, scaling vertical surfaces with effortless ease. He dreams of sensing danger before it appears, of strength that could crush steel, of agility that could defy gravity. The dreams blur with waking hallucinations, his fevered mind unable to distinguish between what's real and what's imagined. He sees Uncle Ben standing at the foot of his bed, though when Peter blinks the figure disappears. He hears Aunt May's voice telling him everything will be all right, though he knows she's already gone to bed for the night. The room around him seems to breathe and shift, walls expanding and contracting, shadows moving with purpose and intention. Through it all, the burning sensation from the spider bite continues to pulse through his system, a constant reminder of the catalyst that started all of this. The radioactive venom works its way through every cell in Peter's body, rewriting genetic code that has remained stable since before his birth. His muscles are restructuring themselves at a microscopic level, muscle fibers becoming denser and more efficient, capable of generating force far beyond what his size should allow. His bones are strengthening, becoming more resistant to impact and stress. His nervous system is rewiring itself to process information faster, to react with speed that will seem almost prescient. His senses are being enhanced, receptors becoming more sensitive, processing centers in his brain expanding to handle the increased input. Most mysteriously of all, something new is being added to Peter's biology, an extra sense that has no equivalent in normal human experience, a kind of early warning system that will alert him to danger before his conscious mind has time to recognize it. This spider sense, as he'll come to think of it, is establishing itself in his nervous system, creating pathways and connections that will allow him to perceive threats that would be impossible to detect through normal awareness. The mechanism behind this ability defies scientific explanation, a fusion of enhanced reflexes, environmental awareness, and something that seems almost precognitive in its ability to warn of approaching danger. As the night wears on toward morning, Peter's fever begins to break. The wild fluctuations in temperature stabilize, his shivering and sweating both subsiding into a state of exhausted calm. The pain from the spider bite has faded to a dull ache, and the hypersensitivity that made every sensation overwhelming begins to moderate into something more manageable. He falls into a deep, dreamless sleep, his body exhausted from the effort of transformation. His mind shut down to allow the final stages of the change to complete themselves without the interference of conscious awareness. When morning comes and sunlight begins to filter through Peter's bedroom window, he wakes to discover that the world has changed. Or rather, that he has changed in ways that make the world appear fundamentally different. Everything that was ordinary about his existence has been rewritten by 8 legs worth of DNA, joining with his human genetic code. The boy who fell asleep in agony and confusion wakes as something new, something that no longer quite fits the category of normal human being. Peter Parker's transformation is complete, and his life will never be the same. The first thing Peter notices when he opens his eyes is the clarity. For as long as he can remember, the world beyond a few feet from his face has existed in a soft blur, details indistinct without the thick glasses that have been part of his appearance since elementary school. He's worn those glasses for so long that reaching for them upon waking has become automatic, a reflex as natural as breathing. But this morning, lying in his bed and looking across his room, Peter can see everything with perfect crystalline sharpness. The books on his shelf across the room, titles that would normally be impossible to read without his glasses, stand out in perfect focus. He can see the individual threads in the fabric of his curtains, the grain pattern in the wooden frame of his desk, the tiny specks of dust floating in the beam of morning sunlight that streams through his window. Colours seem more vivid than they've ever been, richer and deeper, as if someone has turned up the saturation of the world itself. The experience is so disorienting that Peter lies still for several moments, simply processing the fact that he can see with a clarity he's never experienced in his entire life. Moving carefully, Peter reaches for his glasses on the nightstand beside his bed, a gesture born from years of habit. When he puts them on, the world immediately becomes wrong, blurry and distorted in a way that makes his head hurt. He takes them off again, and everything snaps back into perfect focus. The realization settles over him slowly, carefully. The thick glasses that have defined his appearance and marked him as different are suddenly, inexplicably, no longer necessary. His vision has been corrected, or perhaps enhanced, by whatever happened to him yesterday. By that spider bite that still aches faintly on the back of his hand. But the changes go far beyond improved eyesight, as Peter discovers when he tries to sit up in bed. His hand reaches out to grip the wooden headboard, a familiar gesture he's performed thousands of times before, but this time his fingers close with such force that the solid oak splinters beneath his grasp. Peter stares in shock at the finger-shaped indentations he's left in wood that should be far too hard for human hands to damage. He releases his grip immediately, heart pounding, looking at his own hand as if it belongs to someone else, as if it has betrayed him by possessing strength that shouldn't be possible. Testing his theory with trembling fingers, Peter reaches out and easily bends the metal frame of his bedside lamp, the steel giving way like it's made of clay. He picks up a heavy textbook from his nightstand, a tome that usually requires both hands to lift comfortably, and finds that he can hold it in one hand as effortlessly as if it weighs nothing at all. The strength flowing through his muscles feels both exhilarating and terrifying, a power that seems to have no relationship to his actual size or physical conditioning. He's always been thin, not athletic, not particularly strong in any conventional sense, but now he possesses strength that seems to defy every law of biology and physics he's ever learned. The discovery of his wall-crawling ability comes by accident. Peter swings his legs out of bed and stands, still somewhat unsteady from his ordeal, and places his palm against the wall to steady himself. His hand sticks to the surface, not just touching it, but actually adhering with enough force to support his weight. When he tries to pull away, he finds that he has to consciously think about releasing his grip, as if his hands have developed some kind of biological suction that his conscious mind must control. The sensation is bizarre and wonderful, like discovering that he can suddenly fly or breathe underwater, or perform any of the other impossible feats that populate his beloved science fiction stories. Experimenting carefully, afraid that Aunt May or Uncle Ben might hear something and come to investigate, Peter discovers that he can stick to any surface. The wall, the ceiling, the glass of his window, even the smooth, painted surface of his bedroom door. All of them provide purchase for his adhesive grip. The ability seems to work through his clothing, though it's strongest when his skin makes direct contact with a surface. He finds that he can climb his bedroom walls as easily as walking across the floor, his body orienting itself to whatever surface he's touching, as if gravity has become a suggestion rather than a law. The strength is the most immediately obvious change, impossible to ignore or misunderstand. Peter finds that he can lift his heavy wooden desk with one hand, the substantial piece of furniture rising effortlessly, as if it weighs no more than a book. He can bend metal rulers into pretzels, can crush a baseball in his grip until the leather splits and the yarn inside compresses. But with the strength comes something even more remarkable, an instinctive control that allows him to regulate his force with perfect precision. He doesn't accidentally destroy everything he touches because some part of his transformed mind automatically adjusts his grip, applying exactly as much pressure as needed for each task. This control is essential, Peter realizes with growing awareness, because without it he would be a danger to everyone around him. If he shook hands with normal human strength, he could crush bones. If he patted someone on the back with too much force, he could seriously injure them. But the same transformation that gave him this tremendous strength has also given him the ability to modulate it, to touch a fragile object with the same delicate precision he's always possessed, while also being capable of feats that should be impossible for someone his size. Then there's the sense, the awareness that Peter has no name for and no frame of reference to understand. It's as if the world has become transparent to him in ways that go beyond his enhanced vision. He knows when Aunt May is climbing the stairs to check on him long before he hears her footsteps, some inexplicable awareness alerting him to her approach. When a bird flies too close to his window, he's conscious of its presence and trajectory, able to track its movement even when he's not looking directly at it. The sensation is difficult to describe, like having eyes in the back of his head, or perhaps like being connected to the world through invisible threads that vibrate when anything disturbs them. This spider sense, as Peter begins to think of it in his mind, provides him with awareness of his surroundings that feels almost supernatural. It's not quite precognition, not exactly telepathy, but something that exists in the space between enhanced reflexes and genuine foreknowledge. When May knocks on his door, he knows she's there before her knuckles touch the wood. When a glass starts to tip over on his nightstand, he knows it will fall before gravity has fully claimed it, giving him time to catch it, with reflexes that operate faster than conscious thought. The combination of these new abilities, the strength, the wall crawling, the enhanced senses, the inexplicable awareness, creates in Peter a state of excited confusion. The scientific part of his mind desperately wants to understand what's happened to him, to study and quantify these changes, to develop some kind of theoretical framework that can explain how a spider bite could possibly cause such dramatic alterations to human biology. But the teenage part of his mind, the part that has spent years feeling powerless and overlooked and pushed around, thrills at the possibilities these new abilities present. Peter spends the morning hours while Aunt May and Uncle Ben assume he's still sleeping off his illness, exploring these new capabilities in the privacy of his bedroom. He practices sticking to different surfaces, learning to control when he adheres and when he releases. He tests the limits of his strength, discovering that he can jump from a standing position and nearly touch his ceiling, that he can do push-ups with one hand effortlessly, that his muscles don't seem to fatigue the way they used to. He experiments with his enhanced senses, closing his eyes and trying to navigate his room, using only his spider sense to warn him of obstacles. The realization gradually settles over Peter that he has become something other than an ordinary human being. The radioactive spider's bite has rewritten his biology in ways that shouldn't be possible, giving him abilities that exist only in comic books and science fiction stories. He's no longer bound by the limitations that have defined his existence up until yesterday. The boy who couldn't stand up to Flash Thompson, without fear of physical retaliation, who was too weak to participate in sports, who existed on the margins of high school society because he lacked any of the physical attributes that earn respect from his peers, that boy has been transformed into someone capable of extraordinary things. The temptation to test these abilities outside the confines of his bedroom grows stronger as the morning wears on. Peter wants to see what he can really do, to push the boundaries of these new capabilities and discover their limits. But he's also cautious, aware that revealing these changes to anyone would invite questions he has no way of answering. How could he possibly explain to Aunt May and Uncle Ben that a spider bite has given him superhuman abilities? How could he make them understand that their ordinary nephew has become something extraordinary, and do so without frightening them or making them think he's lost his mind? Eventually Peter makes his way downstairs, having convinced himself that he's feeling much better and ready to resume normal activities. Aunt May fusses over him, checking his temperature and insisting that he eat a substantial breakfast to recover his strength. Peter finds that his appetite has increased dramatically, his enhanced metabolism requiring far more calories than his normal diet provides. He eats everything May puts in front of him and still feels hungry, a sensation that will become familiar in the days and weeks to come. Uncle Ben, preparing to leave for work, stops by the kitchen to check on Peter before he goes. There's a conversation that happens in these moments, simple words about feeling better and taking it easy and being careful, that carry more weight than anyone in the room can possibly understand. Ben's gentle concern, his unwavering belief in Peter's fundamental goodness, his quiet lessons about responsibility and character, all of these elements are building towards something that none of them can anticipate. The foundation is being laid for the moral framework that will guide Peter's use of his new abilities, though the crucial lesson that will cement that framework into place is still to come. Returning to school the following day presents Peter with immediate challenges and temptations. Walking through the hallways of Midtown High with powers that make him stronger than anyone around him, with senses that allow him to track every conversation and movement within his awareness, with reflexes that could allow him to respond to any threat before it fully develops, Peter feels simultaneously powerful and profoundly out of place. The building that has been the site of so much humiliation and loneliness suddenly feels different, smaller somehow, less intimidating now that he possesses abilities that could fundamentally change the power dynamics that have defined his high school experience. The real test comes during lunch, when Flash Thompson decides to demonstrate his dominance in the way he has countless times before. Flash approaches Peter in the hallway outside the cafeteria, surrounded as always by his audience of admirers and followers. He makes some dismissive comment about Peter looking sick, questioning whether the class brain is too weak to handle a simple field trip. the familiar pattern begins to unfold. Flash reaching out to shove Peter against the lockers in the casual gesture of superiority that has become routine between them. But this time, everything is different. Peter's spider sense screams a warning the instant Flash begins to move, giving Peter more than enough time to prepare his response. When Flash's hand makes contact with Peter's chest, Peter's enhanced reflexes allow him to catch Flash's wrist with a grip that stops the larger boy's momentum completely. Without thinking, operating on instinct and a deep desire to finally show Flash Thompson that he's not the helpless victim he's always been, Peter pushes the bully away with what feels to him like the gentlest of efforts. Flash stumbles backward several feet, a look of complete surprise and confusion replacing his usual confident smirk. The hallway falls silent as students process what they've just witnessed. Mild-mannered Peter Parker not only standing up to Flash Thompson, but actually overpowering him with apparent ease. The moment stretches out, pregnant with possibility and danger, Flash clearly uncertain how to respond to this unexpected reversal, Peter equally uncertain whether he's just made his situation better or catastrophically worse. The incident creates ripples throughout the school's social ecosystem that Peter hadn't anticipated. Students who have never paid attention to him suddenly look at him with new interest, wondering what else might have changed about Parker besides his apparent willingness to fight back. Teachers notice that the quiet boy from Queens seems more confident, more self-assured, carrying himself with a certainty that wasn't there before. Even Flash seems uncertain about how to proceed, his usual bullying tactics suddenly ineffective against someone who no longer appears to be an easy target. But Peter quickly realizes that he can't simply use his powers to solve his social problems. The strength that allowed him to push Flash away could just as easily seriously injure someone if he's not careful about controlling it. The responsibility of having such abilities begins to weigh on him even before he fully understands what that responsibility means. He finds himself having to consciously hold back in every physical interaction, to remember that what feels like a gentle touch to him might be painful or dangerous to someone with normal human durability. The advertisement that Peter sees in the newspaper a few days later seems to offer a solution to several of his problems simultaneously. A wrestling match is being held at a local arena, with a standing offer of $100 to anyone who can stay in the ring for 3 minutes with professional wrestler Joseph Crusher Hogan. $100 is more money than Peter has ever had at one time, enough to buy the microscope he's been wanting for his experiments, enough to help Uncle Ben with some of the household bills that Peter knows create stress even when his aunt and uncle try to hide their financial concerns from him. More importantly, the wrestling match represents an opportunity to test his abilities in a controlled environment, to discover the true extent of his strength and agility in a situation where using them won't reveal his secret to people who know him. He can wear a disguise, compete anonymously, and see what he's truly capable of without risking the exposure that would come from demonstrating his powers in his daily life. The decision to enter the match represents Peter's first real choice about how to use his new abilities, and it's a choice motivated not by altruism or a desire to help others, but by simple teenage desire for money and recognition. The plan forms in Peter's mind with the kind of excited anticipation that only a 15-year-old who has suddenly acquired superpowers can feel. He'll create a costume that will hide his identity, enter the wrestling match under an assumed name, use his abilities to win the prize money, and return to his normal life with no one the wiser. It seems perfect, a victimless way to profit from the gifts he's been given, a chance to prove to himself, if no one else, that Peter Parker is capable of extraordinary things. The moral implications of using his powers for personal gain rather than to help others don't occur to him, or if they do, they're easily dismissed under the weight of his desire and the apparent harmlessness of his plan. In Uncle Ben's basement workshop, Peter begins working on his costume, using materials he finds around the house and a sewing machine that Aunt May keeps in the closet. The result is crude and amateurish, just a red shirt with a spiderweb pattern, drawn in black marker, blue pants, and a mask that covers most of his face. It's nothing like the sleek, professional costume he'll eventually create, but it serves its purpose. He practices moving in it, making sure the fabric doesn't restrict his movements or interfere with his wall-crawling ability. He needs a name, something that will make sense when the announcer introduces him to the crowd, and the choice seems obvious given the source of his abilities. He'll call himself Spiderman, a name that acknowledges his transformation while maintaining enough distance from Peter Parker to protect his identity. The night before the wrestling match, Peter lies in bed considering what he's about to do. Part of him recognizes that he's about to step across a threshold, that using his abilities publicly, even in disguise, represents a fundamental change in his relationship with the powers he's been given. But the excitement overrides any misgivings. The promise of money and the thrill of finally being able to show what he's capable of proves too tempting to resist. He falls asleep imagining the shocked faces of the crowd when the skinny teenager in the homemade costume defeats a professional wrestler, imagining what he'll do with the prize money. Imagining a future where Peter Parker is no longer invisible or overlooked but recognized for the extraordinary person he's become. The transformation that began with a spider bite is still unfolding, still revealing new dimensions and implications with each passing day. Peter Parker has gained abilities that put him in a category beyond normal humanity, but he hasn't yet learned what those abilities mean or what responsibilities they carry. The lesson is coming, approaching with the inevitability of fate, but for now, Peter exists in a state of innocent excitement, unaware that the choices he's about to make will set him on a path that will define the rest of his life in ways he cannot possibly imagine. The boy is becoming something more than human, but he has not yet become a hero. That transformation, the one that truly matters, is still to come. The wrestling arena where Peter's journey toward understanding the true meaning of power and responsibility will begin sits in a rougher part of the city, the kind of neighborhood where entertainment comes cheap and the crowds aren't particularly discriminating about quality as long as they get spectacle. The building itself has seen better days, its brick facade showing the wear of decades. Posters plastered across its walls advertising everything from boxing matches to concerts to the wrestling exhibition that has drawn Peter here on this Friday night. The marquee lights flicker and buzz, illuminating the promise of easy money for anyone brave or foolish enough to last 3 minutes in the ring with Crusher Hogan. Peter arrives early, his homemade costume hidden in a bag slung over his shoulder. His heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that makes his enhanced senses feel even more overwhelming than usual. The neighborhood around the arena is alive with the kind of energy that comes after dark in places where people seek escape from their daily struggles through entertainment and spectacle. Street vendors sell hot dogs and pretzels, small groups of people smoke and talk on corners, the sound of traffic and conversation creating a urban symphony that Peter's heightened hearing picks up in almost painful detail. Inside the arena, the air is thick with cigarette smoke despite the no smoking signs that everyone ignores. The smell of cheap beer mingles with the scent of sweat and old gymnasium equipment. The lighting is harsh and unforgiving, fluorescent fixtures that cast everything in shades that make the already shabby interior look even more worn and desperate. The crowd that's gathering for the evening's entertainment is exactly what Peter expected. Working-class people looking for a few hours of distraction, teenagers seeking thrills, men placing bets on outcomes that are probably predetermined, but maintain enough illusion of uncertainty to keep things interesting. The dressing area where Peter changes into his costume is little more than a storage room with a mirror, the concrete floor cold beneath his feet, the walls decorated with peeling paint and old fight posters. He pulls on the red shirt with its hand-drawn spiderweb design, the blue pants that are really just athletic wear from his gym class at school, the crude mask that covers enough of his face to protect his identity while still allowing him to see and breathe. Looking at himself in the cracked mirror, Peter sees someone who looks like a child playing at being a superhero, the costume amateurish and slightly ridiculous. But it's enough to hide who he is, and that's all that matters. The name he's chosen, Spiderman, feels both appropriate and slightly embarrassing when he has to tell it to the man organising the matches. The organiser, a heavy-set man with a cigar permanently wedged in the corner of his mouth, looks Peter up and down with undisguised scepticism. He's seen plenty of kids come through here thinking they're tough enough to last with Crusher Hogan, and this skinny teenager in his homemade costume doesn't look like he'll last 30 seconds. Much less 3 minutes. But money is money, and if the kid wants to get beaten up for the crowd's entertainment, that's his business. The crowd's reaction when Peter is introduced as Crusher Hogan's opponent is exactly what he anticipated, but somehow still more humiliating than he prepared himself for. Laughter ripples through the arena, not cruel exactly, but dismissive. The kind of amusement people feel when watching something absurd or pathetic. Bets are placed heavily against the skinny kid in the ridiculous costume, voices calling out odds and amounts that suggest no one, absolutely no one, believes Spider-Man has any chance of surviving 3 minutes with a professional wrestler who outweighs him by at least 80 pounds. Crusher Hogan himself entering the ring with the swagger of someone who has performed this routine countless times before seems almost embarrassed to be fighting someone so obviously outmatched. Joseph Hogan is a large man, muscular and intimidating, his wrestling persona built on the image of unstoppable strength and dominance. He plays to the crowd with practiced ease, flexing and posing, generating the kind of enthusiastic response that Peter has never received from any audience in his entire life. When Hogan looks at Peter, there's a flash of something that might be pity or concern, as if the wrestler is worried about seriously hurting this foolish kid who has no idea what he's gotten himself into. The referee, going through the motions of explaining rules that everyone knows won't really matter, signals for the match to begin. For a moment, Peter simply stands in his corner, acutely aware of every eye in the arena focused on him, of the jeering and laughter that continues even as the bell rings. His spider sense is quiet, registering Hogan as a threat but not an immediate danger, giving Peter the space to decide how he wants to approach this situation. The temptation to simply overwhelm the wrestler with his superior strength and end the match in seconds wars with the desire to make this last, to give the crowd a show they'll remember, to savour this moment of being the centre of attention for once in his life. Hogan makes the first move, lunging toward Peter with the kind of theatrical aggression that professional wrestling requires. To the crowd, it looks like the larger man is about to crush his opponent with a single devastating blow. But Peter's enhanced reflexes make Hogan's movement seem almost comically slow, giving him plenty of time to dodge with an acrobatic flip that draws surprised murmurs from the audience. Peter lands on the rope surrounding the ring, his wall-crawling ability allowing him to balance there with perfect ease, then leaps over Hogan's head in a move that shouldn't be possible for someone without extensive gymnastics training. The dynamic of the match shifts in those first few seconds, as the crowd realizes this might not be the quick demolition they expected. Peter moves around the ring with fluid grace that seems to defy gravity, sticking to the ropes, leaping impossible distances, avoiding Hogan's attacks with ease that makes the professional wrestler look clumsy and slow. The laughter has stopped now, replaced by a mixture of confusion and growing excitement as people realize they're witnessing something genuinely unusual, something that goes beyond the typical staged wrestling match. Peter finds himself enjoying the attention, the gasps of surprise when he performs a particularly impressive feat of acrobatics, the shift from mockery to respect in the crowd's reactions. This is what he's always wanted, to be noticed, to be admired, to have people see him as something other than the invisible class brain who exists on the margins of social life. The power flowing through his muscles, the perfect control he has over his movements, the complete superiority he possesses over an opponent who should theoretically be able to destroy him, all of it combines to create an intoxicating sense of triumph and validation. Crusher Hogan, professional that he is, adapts to the unexpected situation with as much grace as he can muster. He continues to play his role, charging at Peter with dramatic aggression, taking falls that make it look like the smaller fighter is legitimately defeating him rather than simply dodging. But underneath the performance, Peter can sense the wrestler's genuine confusion and growing concern. This isn't how these matches are supposed to go, and Hogan doesn't understand what he's dealing with. Whether this is some kind of special effects trickery, or if the kid in the spider costume actually possesses the abilities he appears to have. As the 3-minute mark approaches, Peter decides to end the match with a flourish that will ensure everyone remembers this moment. He allows Hogan to grab him, then uses his superior strength to lift the much larger man and flip him onto his back with a move that draws gasps and cheers from the crowd. Hogan stays down, either genuinely stunned or recognizing that prolonging this match will only make him look worse, and the referee counts to 3 while the audience erupts in surprised applause. The victory brings Peter more than just the prize money. Though the $100 that the organizer grudgingly pays him represents more wealth than he's ever held at one time. It brings him attention and offers, people who want to talk to him about what he just did, how he did it, whether he'd be interested in more matches or other opportunities. A television producer approaches him as Peter is leaving the ring, still breathing heavily from the exertion and excitement, still processing the fact that he actually won, that he actually demonstrated his abilities in front of hundreds of people and received applause instead of mockery. The producer's offer seems too good to be true, which should probably be a warning sign, but isn't. He wants Spiderman to appear on a variety show, just a brief demonstration of his abilities for a studio audience and television viewers. The payment he's offering is several times what Peter just earned from the wrestling match. Enough money to make a real difference for his family's financial situation. Enough to buy not just a microscope, but all kinds of equipment for his experiments. The producer talks fast, his words tumbling over each other in his enthusiasm, painting pictures of fame and opportunity that appeal to everything Peter has been feeling since he gained his powers. Peter agrees without thinking too deeply about the implications or the long-term consequences. The offer represents exactly what he's been dreaming about since he discovered his abilities. A way to use his powers to gain respect and financial success, to transform from invisible Peter Parker into someone important and valued. The producer gives him a card with an address and a time, promises that this is just the beginning, that someone with Spider-Man's talents could have a real career in entertainment if he plays his cards right. The television appearance goes even better than the wrestling match if such a thing is possible. The studio audience is larger and more diverse, the production values higher, the sense of occasion more significant. Peter performs feats that amaze and delight. Walking up walls and across the ceiling, lifting impossibly heavy objects, demonstrating reflexes that allow him to catch objects thrown at him from multiple directions simultaneously. The host treats him like a celebrity, asking questions about his abilities with the kind of breathless enthusiasm usually reserved for movie stars or famous athletes. For the first time in his life, Peter experiences what it feels like to be admired rather than mocked. To have people hang on his words instead of dismissing them, to be the person everyone wants to talk to instead of the one everyone ignores. The applause when he finishes his demonstration is thunderous, genuine, sustained. People are standing and cheering for Spider-Man, for Peter Parker, even though they don't know that's who he is. And the sensation is more intoxicating than Peter could have possibly imagined. The check he receives for the appearance is almost unbelievable in its amount. Enough money to solve so many of the problems that have shadowed his family's life. Enough to make him feel like maybe these powers are actually a blessing rather than a burden or a responsibility. As Peter leaves the television studio, counting the money he's earned and basking in the glow of public acclaim, he feels like he's discovered his calling. The shy, awkward teenager who was picked on at school has found a way to use his abilities to gain respect and financial success. He's already making plans for future appearances, thinking about how he can parlay his powers into a career that will support him and his family, allow him to pursue his scientific interests without financial constraints, maybe even make him popular enough that high school will become bearable or irrelevant. But the universe has other plans for Peter Parker, plans that will teach him lessons about power and responsibility that he's not yet ready to understand. Walking through the studio building toward the exit, Peter's enhanced senses alert him to commotion ahead. Around a corner, he sees a security guard shouting for someone to stop a thief who has just robbed the building's business office. The thief, a thin man in a dark jacket, runs past Peter toward the elevators, clutching a bag of stolen money, his face showing fear and desperation in equal measure. The security guard, an older man who is clearly outmatched by the younger, faster criminal, calls out to Peter for help. The guard has just watched Spiderman perform impossible feats on television, has seen him lift heavy objects and move with superhuman speed, and reasonably assumes that someone with those abilities could easily catch a fleeing thief. The call for help is desperate and direct, a plea from someone who needs assistance and sees someone capable of providing it standing right there in front of him. For a moment, Peter considers acting. His spider sense is tracking the thief's movement perfectly, and he knows he could easily apprehend the man with his enhanced speed and agility. It would take almost no effort, just a quick burst of movement and the application of his superior abilities against someone who has no chance of escaping or resisting. But then he remembers the words of the television producer, the promises of fame and success, the vision of a future where Spider-Man is an entertainer rather than a crime fighter. The decision Peter makes in that moment will haunt him for the rest of his life, though he doesn't know it yet. He steps aside and lets the thief escape, offering no assistance to the frustrated security guard who is shouting after the fleeing criminal. When the guard turns to Peter with a look of disgust and confusion, asking why he didn't help, why someone with his powers would stand by and watch a crime happen right in front of him, Peter responds with words that he will wish, for the rest of his life, that he could take back. "I'm not a policeman," Peter says. The words coming easily because they express exactly what he's been thinking since he gained his powers. "That's not my responsibility. I'm an entertainer." The security guard's expression shifts from confusion to contempt, a look that cuts deeper than Peter wants to admit. The old man says something about what kind of person stands by and watches when they could help, about power and responsibility and basic human decency. But Peter is already walking away, telling himself that he has no obligation to risk his newfound career to help strangers who have never done anything for him. The thief disappears into the elevator, and the security guard is left standing in the hallway, shaking his head at the moral failure he's just witnessed. Peter continues toward the exit, forcing himself not to think too deeply about what just happened, rationalizing his choice with arguments about personal responsibility and the difference between having abilities and being obligated to use them for others' benefit. He's worked hard to develop his powers, has taken risks to build his reputation. Why should he jeopardize all of that for people who wouldn't do the same for him? This philosophy of enlightened self-interest, this belief that his powers are his to use for his own benefit without any obligation to help others, serves Peter well over the next few weeks. He makes several more television appearances, each one building his fame and his bank account. He signs autographs for fans who wait outside the studios, poses for photographs with people who want to meet Spider-Man, accepts offers for endorsements and appearances that bring money flowing into his life in amounts he's never imagined possible. Aunt May and Uncle Ben notice that Peter seems happier and more confident, though they don't know the source of his transformation. They see him smiling more, worrying less about money, carrying himself with a certainty that wasn't there before. They're pleased by these changes, assuming that Peter is simply growing up, coming into his own, finding his place in the world. They have no idea that their nephew has discovered superhuman abilities and is using them to build a career as an entertainer, and Peter sees no reason to burden them with information that would only worry them or create complications he'd rather avoid. The money Peter brings home, carefully disguised as earnings from odd jobs and freelance work, makes a real difference in the Parker household's financial situation. Bills get paid on time, the constant stress about making ends meet eases, Aunt May stops taking on extra work that exhausts her, Uncle Ben seems less burdened by the weight of providing for his family. Peter tells himself that this proves he's making the right choice, that using his powers to improve his family's life is a worthy goal, that justifies his decision to pursue personal success rather than some nebulous idea of helping strangers. The weeks pass in a blur of performances and growing fame, of money accumulating and Peter's confidence building, of a life that seems to be finally working out the way he always hoped it would. He's still attending school, still dealing with Flash Thompson and the social dynamics of Midtown High, but these concerns feel increasingly trivial compared to his secret life as Spiderman the Entertainer. He has plans for the future now, visions of how he'll use his abilities and his growing fame to build a life that's extraordinary rather than ordinary, successful rather than struggling, admired rather than overlooked. But the universe is preparing to deliver a lesson that will shatter Peter Parker's comfortable philosophy and transform his understanding of what it means to possess power, the choices he's made, the thief he allowed to escape, the philosophy of self-interest he's embraced. All of these elements are converging toward a moment that will break his heart and reshape his entire life. The boy who thought he could use his powers without responsibility is about to learn, in the most devastating way possible, that with great power comes great responsibility, and that failing to accept that responsibility has consequences that can never be undone. The call comes on a Thursday evening in late November, just as the early darkness of autumn settles over Queens and families sit down to dinner in warm, lit kitchens throughout the neighbourhood. Peter is in his room working on homework that takes him only a fraction of the time it should, his mind already planning his next television appearance and calculating how much money he'll earn from an endorsement deal that's being discussed. The sound of the telephone ringing downstairs doesn't immediately register as unusual or concerning, just another ordinary interruption in an ordinary evening at the Parker household. But then Peter hears Aunt May answer, her voice carrying its usual warm greeting that shifts within seconds to something tight and strange, a tone he's never heard from her before. There's a quality to her silence as she listens to whoever is on the other end of the line that makes Peter's newly enhanced senses suddenly focus with sharp attention. Something is wrong, deeply wrong, and even before May calls up the stairs for Uncle Ben, Peter's spider sense begins to tingle with a warning that has nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with the terrible understanding that the comfortable world he's been building is about to collapse. Uncle Ben's heavy footsteps on the stairs, usually so reassuring in their solid reliability, now carry a weight of dread that Peter can feel even from his room. He hears Ben pick up the phone, hears the low murmur of conversation, hears the sharp intake of breath that signals the delivery of devastating news. Peter creeps to the top of the stairs, straining to hear the words being spoken, his enhanced hearing picking up fragments that his mind struggles to assemble into coherent meaning. Police, warehouse, shooting, hospital. The words don't make sense, can't make sense, because they're describing something that happens to other people, not to the Parker family, not to Uncle Ben, who has never hurt anyone in his life. May's voice breaks through the confusion with a cry that cuts through Peter like a physical blow, a sound of grief and fear so profound that it seems to tear something fundamental in the fabric of their home. Ben is holding her, speaking in low tones that are meant to be comforting but carry their own tremor of fear and shock. Peter descends the stairs slowly, each step feeling like it takes an eternity, his mind racing to understand what's happening, while simultaneously refusing to accept the obvious explanation that's presenting itself. The explanation comes in pieces, delivered by Uncle Ben with the kind of careful control that suggests he's barely holding himself together. There's been an incident at the warehouse where Ben works as a night security guard. A burglar broke in looking for things to steal, and when Ben tried to stop him, the criminal pulled a gun. The shot was fired at close range, the kind of distance that makes survival unlikely even with immediate medical attention. Ben is at the hospital now, the police officer on the phone had said, but the tone of his voice suggested that Peter and May should prepare themselves for the worst. The drive to the hospital passes in a blur of streetlights and worry. Aunt May clutching her purse in the passenger seat and whispering prayers under her breath while Peter sits in the back, trying to make sense of the senseless. His mind keeps circling back to the same impossible thought that Uncle Ben, the most careful and gentle man Peter has ever known, is somehow caught up in violence that should never have touched him. The man who fixes neighbours' broken appliances and teaches lessons about kindness and responsibility, shot by some random criminal over merchandise that isn't worth a fraction of what Ben's life means to the people who love him. The hospital waiting room is too bright, the fluorescent lights harsh and clinical, the smell of antiseptic failing to cover the underlying sense of illness and fear that permeate the space. A police officer is waiting for them, his face showing the kind of professional sympathy that comes from delivering bad news too many times to count. The words he speaks are probably meant to be gentle, to soften the blow of what he has to tell them, but there's no gentle way to explain that Uncle Ben died from his injuries before the ambulance could even get him to the emergency room, that the bullet struck something vital, and there was simply nothing anyone could do. Aunt May collapses into a chair, her small body folding in on itself as sobs shake her frame with a violence that seems impossible from someone so physically delicate. Peter stands frozen, unable to process the information he's just received, unable to reconcile the reality of Uncle Ben's death with the fact that just this morning they had breakfast together, talked about Peter's plans for the day, shared the kind of ordinary conversation that never seems important until it becomes the last conversation you'll ever have. The grief hits Peter like a physical assault, doubling him over with its intensity, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to exist in a world that no longer contains the man who raised him and taught him everything important about being a decent human being. Uncle Ben, who called him Tiger, and helped him with homework and fix broken things and believed in Peter's goodness, even when Peter gave him reasons to doubt, is gone. The foundation of Peter's world has been ripped away, leaving nothing but a chasm of loss that seems impossible to cross or survive. But grief, overwhelming as it is, quickly transforms into something else. Something hot and consuming and focused with laser precision on the man who pulled the trigger. The police officer is explaining that they have the warehouse surrounded, that the burglar is trapped inside and it is only a matter of time before they apprehend him, that justice will be served. But justice feels abstract and insufficient compared to the raw need for vengeance that's building in Peter's chest, a desire to make the man who did this pay in ways that the legal system never could. Peter excuses himself from the hospital waiting room, claiming he needs some air, and slips away to a bathroom where he can change into the Spiderman costume that he's taken to carrying with him everywhere. The crude outfit that once represented his path to fame and fortune now becomes something else entirely, a uniform for revenge, a tool for delivering the kind of justice that comes from rage rather than law. The face that looks back at him from the bathroom mirror is barely recognizable, eyes red from tears he hasn't allowed himself to fully cry, jaw clenched with determination that borders on fury. Finding the killer proves surprisingly easy for someone with Peter's enhanced senses and agility. The police have cordoned off the warehouse and set up a perimeter, but they're looking for a normal human being, not someone who can climb walls and move through shadows without being detected. Peter's spider sense leads him through the building, following traces of the gunman's passage like a bloodhound on a scent trail, his enhanced senses picking up details that normal investigation would miss. The warehouse is old and cavernous, filled with shadows and the kind of industrial debris that accumulates in places that have outlived their original purpose. Moonlight filters through broken windows high above, creating patterns of light and dark that Peter navigates with ease, his wall-crawling ability allowing him to move along routes that would be impossible for anyone pursuing on foot. His enhanced hearing picks up the sound of breathing, rapid and frightened. coming from a corner of the building where the burglar has taken refuge. The man Peter finds hiding among old crates and machinery is pathetic rather than formidable, a thin figure whose fear is palpable even from a distance. This is the person who took Uncle Ben's life, who destroyed Aunt May's happiness, who shattered the foundation of everything Peter held dear. The rage that's been building in Peter since he heard the news threatens to override every lesson Uncle Ben ever taught him about restraint and mercy, every value that's supposed to separate the good from the bad. Peter's approach is silent and swift, his enhanced abilities making him a predator stalking prey that has no chance of escape. The criminal doesn't see him coming, doesn't hear the whisper of movement as Spiderman descends from the shadows above. When Peter finally reveals himself, dropping down to land directly in front of the burglar, the man's terrified response provides a moment of savage satisfaction. This is what power feels like when it's used without restraint, without the moral framework that Uncle Ben spent years trying to instill. The confrontation is brief and decisive, Peter's enhanced abilities making him more than a match for an ordinary criminal who is already exhausted and terrified from hours of hiding. Peter's web shooters, the mechanical devices he created to supplement his organic abilities, make quick work of restraining the burglar, wrapping him in sticky strands that make resistance impossible. Peter has the man helpless, completely at his mercy, and for a moment the temptation to deliver justice with his own hands, to make this killer feel even a fraction of the pain he's caused, threatens to consume every other consideration. But as Peter prepares to do something that would cross the line from hero to killer, the burglar turns toward him, and Peter sees his face clearly for the first time. The recognition hits like a thunderbolt, freezing Peter in place as the full implications crash over him with devastating force. This is the same man he let escape from the television studio just 2 weeks earlier, the thief he refused to stop when the security guard begged for help, the criminal he allowed to walk free because catching criminals wasn't his responsibility. The moment stretches into eternity as Peter's mind processes this impossible, unbearable truth. If he had stopped this man when he had the chance, if he had used his powers to help instead of stepping aside because it wasn't his problem, Uncle Ben would still be alive. The man who raised him, who loved him, who taught him about responsibility and doing what's right even when it's difficult, died because Peter chose selfishness over service, personal gain over moral obligation. The killer, seeing Peter's shocked reaction, begins to babble about their previous encounter, not knowing that he's talking to the same person who let him go. The words wash over Peter in fragments, the man recounting how he got away from that television studio, how some costume performer could have stopped him but didn't, how that lucky break gave him the opportunity to commit the robbery that ended in Uncle Ben's death. Each word is a knife in Peter's heart, a confirmation of the terrible truth that he could have prevented all of this if he had made a different choice. Peter's world crumbles around him as he realizes the full scope of his failure. All of Uncle Ben's lessons about responsibility, about using whatever abilities you possess to help others, about the importance of doing what's right even when it's inconvenient or personally costly, all of those teachings that Peter heard but didn't truly understand suddenly crystallize into painful clarity. The power he gained from the spider bite wasn't given to him for his own benefit, wasn't meant to be used for personal fame or financial success. It came with an obligation that he failed to recognize until it was too late. The phrase that Uncle Ben said so many times, often in the context of conversations about Peter's intelligence or his potential future, echoes in Peter's mind with new and terrible meaning. With great power comes great responsibility. It wasn't just advice or a general principle about how capable people should behave. It was a fundamental truth about the nature of power and obligation, a law as immutable as gravity or thermodynamics. Peter had power, real power, the kind that could save lives or prevent tragedies, and with that power came the responsibility to use it for others, not just for himself. The weight of this knowledge threatens to crush Peter, as he stands in the warehouse looking at the man whose crime he could have prevented. Uncle Ben's death is not just a random tragedy, not just the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's the direct consequence of Peter's moral failure, his choice to prioritize his own interest over his responsibility to use his power to help others. The guilt that accompanies this realization is almost unbearable, a crushing awareness that the man he loved most in the world died because of Peter's selfishness. The temptation to become a killer himself, to cross the line that separates hero from villain and deliver permanent justice to the man who pulled the trigger. War with the understanding that doing so would only compound his failure and betray everything Uncle Ben tried to teach him. Violence born from rage and guilt wouldn't honour Uncle Ben's memory, wouldn't undo the terrible mistake Peter made, wouldn't make anything better. It would only prove that Peter learned nothing from the tragedy, that he's willing to abandon his principles when they become inconvenient. Peter leaves the killer webbed up for the police to find, along with evidence of his guilt and the stolen money that cost Uncle Ben his life. He can't bring himself to deliver the man directly to the authorities, because that would require explanations and interactions that Peter isn't capable of handling in his current emotional state. The real justice, the real payment for Uncle Ben's death, won't come from the legal system's response to a burglar-turned-murderer. It will come from Peter's commitment to ensure that his failure never happens again, that he never again stands aside when he has the power to help. Walking home through the quiet streets of Queens, still wearing his Spiderman costume under his jacket, Peter makes a vow that will define the rest of his life. Never again will he use his powers solely for personal benefit. Never again will he stand aside when he has the ability to prevent harm to others. The gifts that the radioactive spider gave him will be dedicated to protecting innocent people from the predators who threaten them, to ensuring that no one else suffers the kind of loss that has devastated his family because someone with the power to help chose not to act. The lesson has been learned at the highest possible cost, written in blood and grief across Peter's heart. Uncle Ben's death will not be meaningless if it prevents Peter from making the same mistake again, if it transforms him from someone who uses power for personal gain into someone who accepts the responsibility that comes with that power. The boy who gained spider powers by accident and tried to use them to make himself rich and famous died in that warehouse along with his innocence and his selfishness. In his place, something new is being born. Spiderman, the real Spiderman, the hero who will spend his life fighting to protect others regardless of personal cost, emerges from the crucible of loss and guilt with a clarity of purpose that will sustain him through decades of sacrifice and struggle. The friendly neighbourhood wall crawler who will become beloved by millions of readers began his true career not with a triumph, but with a failure so profound that it reshaped his entire understanding of heroism and responsibility. Peter returns home to find Aunt May still at the hospital, surrounded by neighbours and friends who have come to offer support and comfort in the family's darkest hour. He sits with her through the long night, holding her hand and sharing her grief, unable to tell her the truth about his role in Uncle Ben's death, but carrying that knowledge as a burden he will bear for the rest of his life. The secret of his failure joins the secret of his powers, both truths that he must keep hidden while living with their consequences. The days following Uncle Ben's funeral pass in a fog of grief and adjustment, as Peter and Aunt May try to navigate a world that no longer contains the man who was the centre of their family. The house feels emptier, quieter, haunted by Uncle Ben's absence in ways both large and small. His chair at the dinner table, his tools in the basement workshop, his jacket hanging by the door, all of these ordinary objects become painful reminders of everything that's been lost. But through the grief, through the guilt that threatens to consume him, Peter feels something else beginning to grow, a sense of purpose, of mission, of understanding about what his life is meant to be. The powers he gained by accident aren't random or meaningless. They're a responsibility that he failed to recognise until the cost of that failure became unbearable. Uncle Ben's final gift to his nephew, delivered through tragedy and loss, is the lesson that will guide Peter for the rest of his life and make him into the hero he was always meant to become. With great power comes great responsibility. It's not just a saying anymore, not just wise advice from a man who saw potential in a boy others overlooked. It's the fundamental principle that will govern every choice Peter makes, every risk he takes, every sacrifice he endures. The teenager who wanted to use his powers to become rich and famous has been transformed by grief and guilt into someone who understands that heroism isn't about personal glory or public acclaim. It's about using whatever abilities you possess to help others, to prevent suffering, to stand between innocent people and the dangers that threaten them. The boy is gone, destroyed by the knowledge of his failure and the weight of his responsibility. In his place stands someone who has learned, through the most devastating lesson imaginable, what it truly means to be a hero. Peter Parker has gained his powers, but Spider-Man, the real Spider-Man, the hero who will dedicate his life to ensuring that others don't suffer as he and Aunt May have suffered, is only now being born from the ashes of tragedy and the fire of commitment to a purpose larger than himself. The weeks following Uncle Ben's funeral become a time of transformation for Peter Parker, though the change is gradual and often painful, marked more by mistakes and failures than by triumphant victories. The grief that consumes him in those early days is complicated by guilt so profound that it colours every waking moment, making even the simplest tasks feel weighted with the burden of his moral failure. He moves through his daily life like a ghost, attending school without really being present, helping Aunt May with household tasks while his mind remains trapped in the warehouse, where everything changed. The first time Peter ventures out as Spider-Man after Uncle Ben's death, it's not because he has a plan or a clear understanding of what he's doing, but because sitting in his room thinking about what he could have done differently is slowly driving him mad. He needs to do something, anything, that might begin to balance the scales of his failure, that might prove to himself and to Uncle Ben's memory that he's learned the lesson that came at such terrible cost. The crude costume that once represented his ambitions for fame and money now serves a different purpose entirely, a uniform for the mission he's committed himself to without fully understanding what that mission entails. The rooftops of Queens become Peter's domain in these early nights of crime fighting, the view from above giving him perspective on the neighbourhood he's sworn to protect, while also providing the kind of solitude that his grief requires. Moving through the darkness, swinging from building to building on web lines that he's learned to control with increasing precision, Peter discovers that the physical activity provides temporary relief from the emotional pain that threatens to overwhelm him. When he's focused on maintaining his momentum, calculating angles and distances, trusting his spider sense to warn him of obstacles, there's less room in his mind for the memories and the guilt. But crime fighting proves to be far more complicated than Peter's comic books and television shows suggested. His first attempt to stop a mugging goes wrong in almost every way possible, his inexperience and lack of training turning what should be a simple intervention into a chaotic mess. He swings down from a rooftop to confront two men threatening a woman in an alley, his dramatic entrance meant to intimidate the criminals into surrender. Instead, his miscalculated landing sends him tumbling into a row of garbage cans, the noise and confusion giving the muggers time to flee in opposite directions, while Peter struggles to untangle himself from trash and his own webbing. The woman he intended to rescue screams and runs away, apparently as frightened by the appearance of a costume figure swinging from the rooftops as she was by the men who were threatening her. Peter is left standing alone in the alley, covered in garbage and feeling like a complete fool, the gap between his heroic intentions and his actual capabilities painfully obvious. The lesson is humbling but necessary, a reminder that having powers doesn't automatically translate into knowing how to use them effectively, that heroism requires skill and judgment and practice, not just good intentions and enhanced abilities. The web shooters that Peter designed to supplement his organic wall-crawling abilities malfunction at the worst possible moments during these early attempts at crime fighting. The mechanical devices, built in Uncle Ben's basement workshop from materials Peter could scavenge or afford, are brilliant in concept but unreliable in execution. The web fluid sometimes comes out too thick, creating globs instead of strands, or too thin, producing webbing that snaps under stress. The trigger mechanism occasionally jams, leaving Peter stranded on a rooftop when he needs to swing to another location, forcing him to climb down fire escapes like an ordinary person, while criminals he was pursuing escape. The costume itself presents problems that Peter never anticipated when he hastily assembled it for the wrestling match. The mask doesn't breathe properly, leaving him gasping for air during extended physical activity, his enhanced metabolism requiring more oxygen than the crude fabric allows. The homemade outfit offers no protection against the elements, providing inadequate warmth on cold November nights, when he's swinging through the air at speeds that make the wind chill factor dangerously low. The fabric catches and tears on rough surfaces, requiring constant repair that eats into time he should be spending on homework or sleeping, or simply processing his grief. More challenging than the technical problems are the ethical dilemmas that Peter encounters almost immediately. His first week of crime fighting brings him face to face with a homeless man stealing food from a convenience store, and Peter freezes in uncertainty about whether this counts as the kind of crime he should be stopping. The man is clearly desperate, thin to the point of starvation, taking bread and canned goods rather than money or valuables. Is this the kind of predatory behaviour that led to Uncle Ben's death, or is it survival in a society that has failed its most vulnerable members? Peter lets the man go, unable to reconcile his mission to fight crime with the reality of someone stealing because they're hungry. But the decision haunts him, raising questions about what kind of hero he's trying to be, whether his responsibility extends to addressing the root causes of crime or just stopping its symptoms, how he's supposed to distinguish between criminals who deserve to be stopped and people who are simply trying to survive in difficult circumstances. Uncle Ben would have known how to think through these complexities, would have helped Peter develop a moral framework for making these difficult decisions, but Uncle Ben is gone, and Peter is left to navigate these questions alone. The learning curve is steep and frequently painful. Peter misjudges his strength during a confrontation with a burglar, and accidentally breaks the man's arm with a blow he intended to be restraining rather than damaging. The sound of bones snapping and the burglar's scream of pain create a memory that will haunt Peter's dreams for weeks, a reminder that his enhanced strength makes him dangerous even when he's trying to be careful. He spends hours afterward wondering if he's any better than the criminals he's fighting, if causing harm in pursuit of justice is morally different from causing harm for personal gain. His spider sense proves to be both a gift and a source of confusion during these early weeks. The warning tingles that alert him to danger are sometimes overwhelming in their intensity, making it difficult to distinguish between genuine threats and minor hazards. A car backfiring can trigger his spider sense with the same urgency as an actual gunshot. A person moving quickly in his peripheral vision can set off alarms that make him react defensively to behaviour that's completely innocent. Learning to interpret and trust these warnings while also not overreacting to false positives requires practice that can only come through experience. The financial pressures on the Parker household intensify without Uncle Ben's income, creating stress that Aunt May tries to hide but that Peter can feel in every conversation about bills and expenses. The funeral costs have depleted what little savings they had, and May's part-time work at various jobs around the neighbourhood doesn't generate enough income to cover their basic needs. Peter knows he could solve these problems easily by returning to his career as Spiderman the Entertainer. The television appearances and endorsement deals would bring in money that would make their lives comfortable instead of desperate. But the thought of using his powers for personal profit now makes Peter physically ill. The memory of Uncle Ben's death inextricably linked to his earlier choices about how to use his abilities. Every time the temptation arises to take the easy path and monetize his powers, Peter forces himself to remember the security guard's face when he let the thief escape. Remember Uncle Ben bleeding in a warehouse because Peter decided that helping others wasn't his responsibility. The financial struggle is another price he must pay for his failure, another consequence of the choices he made before he understood what responsibility truly meant. The solution comes from an unexpected direction, born from necessity and Peter's natural creativity with technology. He realizes that while he can't ethically use his powers to perform for entertainment, he can use them to create opportunities for photographic documentation that would be impossible for anyone else to obtain. No normal photographer could get the angles and proximity to Spider-Man that Peter can achieve by setting up cameras before his crime-fighting activities, using timers and web-attached devices to capture images of himself in action. The Daily Bugle, New York's most sensational newspaper, proves to be the perfect market for such photographs. The paper's publisher, J. Jonah Jameson, has built his career on dramatic headlines and controversial stories, and pictures of the mysterious Spider-Man represent exactly the kind of content that sells newspapers. When Peter walks into the Bugle offices with his first batch of Spider-Man photos, nervously approaching the receptionist's desk and asking if they buy freelance photography, he has no idea that he's establishing a relationship that will define much of his adult life. Jameson himself is a force of nature, a middle-aged man with a distinctive moustache and an ego that fills whatever room he occupies. His office is dominated by awards and framed newspaper front pages, testimonials to a journalism career built on exposing corruption and holding powerful people accountable. His initial reaction to Peter's Spider-Man photos is purely professional. They're good pictures that will help sell papers, and he's willing to pay a fair price for them. But something about the masked vigilante immediately rubs Jameson the wrong way, triggering instincts honed by decades of questioning authority and challenging people who operate outside normal accountability. The irony of the situation is lost on everyone except Peter, who finds himself in the surreal position of being paid to provide evidence of his own activities to a newspaper whose publisher considers him a menace to society. Every dramatic photo that helps Jameson sell papers also provides him with ammunition for his anti-Spider-Man editorials, creating a strange symbiotic relationship where Peter profits from documenting his heroic activities, while simultaneously fueling the public criticism of those same activities. Betty Brandt, Jameson's secretary, represents Peter's first meaningful connection to someone outside his immediate family since Uncle Ben's death. She's a few years older than Peter, maybe 19 or 20, with an air of maturity and independence that comes from having to support herself and make her own way in the world. When Peter nervously approaches her desk to inquire about selling photographs, her kindness and professionalism immediately put him at ease. Her treatment of him as a legitimate professional rather than an awkward teenager providing a dignity that he desperately needs. Their relationship develops slowly over Peter's repeated visits to the Bugle offices, built on small conversations while he waits to meet with the photo editor or collect payment for his latest batch of Spider-Man pictures. Betty treats Peter with a respect that he's not accustomed to receiving from anyone outside his family, seeing him as a talented young photographer with unique access to his subject, rather than as the class brain or the awkward kid who doesn't fit in. For Peter, who's carrying the weight of Uncle Ben's death and the responsibility of his secret identity and the constant struggle to be a better hero, Betty's uncomplicated friendliness feels like a lifeline to normalcy. The income from selling photographs to the Daily Bugle doesn't solve all of the Parker household's financial problems, but it provides enough stability to prevent the situation from becoming desperate. Peter can help with grocery bills and utilities, can ensure that Aunt May doesn't have to work multiple jobs to keep their house, can maintain the modest but secure life that Uncle Ben works so hard to provide. The money comes from his activities as Spider-Man, but isn't payment for using his powers for personal gain. It's compensation for documentation of newsworthy events, a distinction that Peter needs to maintain for his own sense of ethical consistency. As Spider-Man's reputation grows throughout the neighborhood, Peter begins to understand that his activities are creating ripples that extend far beyond the specific crimes he prevents or criminals he captures. People in Queens start to feel safer knowing that someone is watching. that the kind of random violence that took Uncle Ben's life might be prevented by a mysterious figure who swings through the night protecting innocent people. Store owners report decreased break-ins, muggers find fewer targets willing to walk alone after dark. The overall atmosphere of the neighbourhood shifts toward hope rather than fear. But not everyone views Spider-Man's activities positively, and Peter encounters resistance from unexpected quarters. Some police officers appreciate having a costume vigilante helping to keep the streets safe, recognizing that his abilities allow him to intervene in situations where normal law enforcement might fail. Others view him with suspicion and hostility, seeing a mask-wearing vigilante as someone who undermines the authority of legitimate law enforcement and potentially violates the civil rights of the people he apprehends without warrant or due process. The relationship between Spider-Man and the New York Police Department settles into an uneasy détente during these early months, with individual officers' reactions varying based on their personal philosophies about vigilante justice and their experiences with Spider-Man's interventions. Some leave crime scenes before he arrives, giving him tacit permission to do what he needs to do without official endorsement. Others actively try to apprehend him, viewing his activities as illegal regardless of their outcomes. J. Jonah Jameson's editorial campaign against Spider-Man begins during this period, starting with questioning articles about the masked vigilante's lack of accountability and escalating into full-throated denunciations of anyone who operates outside the law regardless of their intentions. Jameson's arguments have a certain logic that Peter can't entirely dismiss. Questions about who gave Spider-Man the right to take the law into his own hands, what prevents him from abusing his powers, how society can trust someone who hides behind a mask and refuses to submit to any form of oversight or accountability. The public reaction to Jameson's editorials is mixed, with some people embracing the publisher's skepticism, while others defend Spider-Man based on the concrete good his actions have produced. Peter finds himself in the strange position of reading criticism of his heroic activities in a newspaper that pays him for photographs documenting those same activities, profiting from both sides of a debate about whether he should exist at all. The cognitive dissonance is dizzying, but it also provides Peter with valuable perspective on how his actions are perceived by people who don't know his motivations or the price he's paid to become a hero. The psychological toll of living a double life begins to accumulate during these months, as Peter struggles to maintain the appearance of normalcy at school while carrying the weight of his responsibilities as Spider-Man and his grief over Uncle Ben's death. His grades start to slip as late nights, fighting crime, cut into time he should be spending on homework. His attendance becomes irregular as Spider-Man emergencies force him to miss classes. His social isolation deepens as the secrets he's carrying create barriers between himself and anyone who might otherwise become a friend. Flash Thompson's bullying continues, but feels increasingly irrelevant to Peter, whose perspective on what constitutes a real threat has been fundamentally altered by his experiences fighting actual criminals who pose genuine dangers. Flash's taunts and physical intimidation might once have seemed important, but compared to facing armed robbers or preventing assaults, the high school social hierarchy feels like children playing games that don't matter. Peter endures Flash's harassment with a patience born from knowing that he could end it instantly if he chose to use his powers, but also knowing that doing so would violate the principles he's committed himself to about not using his abilities for personal benefit. The nightmares that plague Peter during this period reflect the trauma he's carrying, dreams where he relives Uncle Ben's death with the added dimension of watching it happen because he chose not to stop the killer, visions of the security guard's contemptuous face when Peter let the thief escape, scenarios where his failure to act results in endless variations of tragedy and loss. He wakes from these dreams sweating and gasping, the boundary between sleep and waking unclear. Aunt May sometimes knocking on his door to ask if he's all right because his cries have disturbed her sleep in the next room. But gradually, through mistakes and failures and small victories, Peter begins to develop the skills and judgment that heroism requires, He learns to calculate the strength needed for different situations, to distinguish between threats that require immediate intervention and problems that are better solved through other means, to trust his spider sense while also using his intelligence to interpret its warnings. The crude costume gets upgraded with improvements born from practical experience, better materials for the mask that allow proper breathing, reinforced sections in areas that experience the most wear, pockets and compartments for web shooter cartridges and other equipment he needs to carry. The web shooters themselves undergo constant refinement as Peter experiments with different formulas for the web fluid and modifications to the mechanical triggers. He develops variations for different situations, impact webbing that spreads on contact for stopping multiple targets, web nets for capturing criminals from a distance, web shields for deflecting projectiles. The workshop in Uncle Ben's basement becomes Peter's laboratory, where he processes his grief through creative problem-solving, each improvement to his equipment a way of honouring the man who taught him that fixing broken things is about patience and dedication rather than quick solutions. As winter approaches and the nights grow longer and colder, Peter Parker settles into the rhythm of his new life, balancing the demands of school and family and his responsibilities as Spider-Man in a juggling act that leaves him perpetually exhausted, but also strangely fulfilled. The boy who gained powers by accident has become someone who chooses daily to use those powers in service of others, who accepts the sacrifices and difficulties that choice entails, who is learning through hard experience what it means to be responsible for the gifts he's been given. The friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is taking shape through these early trials and errors, becoming not just a crime fighter, but a symbol of hope for people who need to believe that someone is watching out for them. The mission that began in tragedy and guilt is transforming into something larger and more meaningful, a calling that gives Peter's life purpose even as it makes that life infinitely more complicated. Uncle Ben's lesson about power and responsibility has been written into the foundation of Peter's character, guiding every choice and shaping the hero he's becoming, one web swing, one mistake, one small victory at a time. The months of fighting crime and developing his abilities as Spider-Man bring Peter to a deeper understanding of the transformation that occurred on that November day when the radioactive spider bit him. The changes go far beyond the obvious manifestations of strength and wall crawling, extending into aspects of his biology and psychology that he's only beginning to comprehend. Each day reveals new dimensions to his altered physiology, new ways in which the fusion of human and spider, DNA, has fundamentally rewritten what it means to be Peter Parker. The most immediate and persistent change is his metabolism, which has been accelerated to support the energy demands of his enhanced abilities. Peter finds that he needs to eat constantly, consuming meals that would sustain a grown man multiple times throughout the day just to maintain his energy levels. Aunt May worries about his appetite, concerned that their limited grocery budget can't possibly keep pace with his apparently bottomless hunger, not understanding that his body is burning calories at a rate that would be impossible for a normal teenager. The experience of being hungry has taken on a new quality since the transformation. Not just the normal discomfort of an empty stomach, but a gnawing urgency that affects his concentration and physical performance. If Peter goes too long without eating, his enhanced abilities begin to falter, his strength diminishing, his reflexes slowing, his spider sense becoming less reliable. He learns to carry snacks everywhere, granola bars and fruit stuffed into his backpack, eating between classes and during his patrol routes through Queens, fueling the biological engine that allows him to perform feats that should be impossible. The healing factor that Peter discovers almost by accident proves to be one of his most valuable adaptations, though its existence raises as many questions as it answers. A cut sustained during a fight with a burglar, a gash on his forearm that should have required stitches and weeks to properly heal, closes completely within 2 days, leaving only a faint scar that fades to invisibility within a week. Bruises that would normally purple and linger for days disappear overnight. Broken bones knit themselves back together in a fraction of the normal healing time, his body repairing damage with efficiency that seems almost miraculous. This enhanced healing doesn't make Peter invincible, a fact he learns painfully through experience. He still feels pain when he's injured, still suffers the immediate consequences of physical trauma, still needs to be careful about avoiding damage that might overwhelm even his impressive regenerative abilities. But it does mean that the cumulative wear and tear of his activities as Spider-Man, the constant minor injuries that would sideline a normal person, become manageable obstacles rather than career-ending impediments. He can take risks that would be foolish for someone without his recovery abilities, can push his body to limits that would hospitalize an ordinary teenager, secure in the knowledge that his biology will repair whatever damage he sustains. The spider sense continues to evolve and refine itself through constant use, becoming more sophisticated in its warnings and more integrated into Peter's conscious awareness. What began as an inexplicable tingling that alerted him to danger has developed into something approaching a sixth sense, providing information about his environment that goes beyond simple threat detection. He can feel the presence of people around him even when they're out of sight, track movement and intention through some mechanism that he doesn't fully understand but has learned to trust implicitly. The nature of the spider sense remains mysterious even to Peter's scientific mind, which struggles to develop a theoretical framework that could explain how it functions. It's not telepathy, he can't read thoughts or emotions directly, but it provides awareness of hostile intent that feels almost precognitive. When someone is about to attack him, even from behind or from a concealed position, the spider sense warns him with enough advance notice to react. When a bullet is fired in his direction, the alarm goes off before the projectile could possibly reach him, giving his enhanced reflexes time to dodge. The mechanism defies conventional physics and biology, suggesting that the radioactive transformation unlocked abilities that exist outside the normal boundaries of human sensory perception. Learning to interpret the spider sense's warnings becomes an ongoing process of calibration and trust. Not every tingle indicates immediate danger. Sometimes it's warning him about potential threats that might develop into actual hazards, giving him information he needs to avoid problems before they fully materialize. A car driving too fast around a corner might trigger his spider sense even though the vehicle isn't directly threatening him, the warning allowing him to position himself to intervene if the driver loses control. A person acting suspiciously might set off low-level alerts that put Peter on guard without indicating imminent attack, preparing him for problems that might or might not develop. The physical changes to Peter's body have also affected his appearance in subtle ways that he's only gradually becoming aware of. His muscle tone has improved dramatically despite not engaging in any conventional strength training, the enhanced biology creating lean, efficient muscles that are far stronger than their size would suggest. His posture has straightened as the hunched, defensive stance he developed during years of bullying gives way to the confidence that comes from knowing he's no longer vulnerable to physical intimidation. His movements have become more fluid and graceful, the enhanced coordination and reflexes making even simple actions like walking or reaching for objects seem more deliberate and controlled. The vision that was corrected by the spider bite remains perfectly sharp, better than 20/20 in conventional measurements, allowing Peter to see details at distances that would require binoculars for normal human eyesight. He can read street signs from blocks away, can spot movement in his peripheral vision that would be invisible to ordinary people, can function in low-light conditions that would leave others effectively blind. The world has become clearer and more detailed, every surface showing texture and nuance that he never noticed before. Colours appearing richer and more vibrant than they did when he needed glasses to see properly. His hearing has been similarly enhanced, creating both advantages and challenges in his daily life. Peter can hear conversations from across crowded rooms, can detect the approach of people long before they come into view, can pick up sounds at frequencies above and below normal human range. The ability proves useful for his crime-fighting activities, allowing him to locate people in distress or criminals trying to escape, but it also makes ordinary environments like school hallways or city streets overwhelming in their cacophony. He's had to learn to filter and focus his hearing, to consciously ignore the flood of auditory information and concentrate on relevant sounds, a skill that requires constant practice and occasionally fails when he's tired or distracted. The sense of smell has also been amplified, though this proves to be a mixed blessing at best. Peter can track people by their scent, can detect chemicals or substances from remarkable distances, can identify individuals by their unique olfactory signatures. But he can also smell every unpleasant aspect of urban life with uncomfortable clarity, the garbage and exhaust and unwashed bodies that normal people mercifully perceive in muted form. He learns to breathe through his mouth in particularly offensive environments, though even that doesn't completely protect him from the assault on his enhanced senses. The wall-crawling ability that seems so simple in its initial manifestation proves to have layers of complexity that Peter continues to discover. The adhesion doesn't just work on his hands and feet, but can be engaged through any part of his body that makes contact with a surface, allowing him to stick to walls with his back or his side if necessary. The strength of the bond he can create varies based on his conscious control, from a light grip that allows him to climb while maintaining mobility, to a hold so strong that it would require tremendous force to break his connection to the surface. The mechanism behind the wall crawling remains unclear despite Peter's attempts to study it scientifically. It's not simple suction. There's no vacuum being created that would limit it to smooth surfaces. It's not chemical adhesion. He doesn't leave residue behind when he climbs. The best explanation Peter can develop involves some kind of molecular bonding at the microscopic level, his cells interacting with the surface material in ways that create temporary but incredibly strong attractions. The fact that it works through his costume as well as his bare skin suggests that the effect extends slightly beyond his body, creating a field of adhesive force rather than requiring direct contact between his skin and the surface. The integration of all these enhanced abilities into a cohesive whole requires Peter to fundamentally rethink his relationship with his own body. He's no longer bound by the limitations that defined his existence for 15 years, no longer constrained by weakness or poor coordination, or the vulnerability that made him a target for bullies. But with these new capabilities comes the responsibility to control them, to ensure that his enhanced strength doesn't accidentally hurt innocent people, that his heightened senses don't overwhelm his ability to function in normal environments, that his wall crawling doesn't reveal his secret identity through careless use. The psychological impact of the transformation extends beyond the obvious changes to Peter's confidence and self-image. The constant awareness of his own power, the knowledge that he could destroy property or injure people with casual gestures if he's not careful, creates a low-level anxiety that never completely goes away. He finds himself constantly modulating his strength, consciously thinking about how hard to grip a doorknob or how much force to use when shaking hands, living with the awareness that a moment of inattention or frustration could result in consequences he would regret. The spider sense creates its own form of psychological pressure, the constant awareness of potential threats making it difficult for Peter to ever fully relax. Even when he's supposed to be resting or sleeping, some part of his mind remains alert to danger, the early warning system that saved his life numerous times also ensuring that he never experiences the complete unconsciousness that allows for truly restorative rest. The exhaustion that accumulates from this perpetual vigilance adds to the physical tiredness from his crime-fighting activities, creating a deficit of rest that no amount of sleep seems able to fully address. The isolation that comes from keeping these abilities secret also takes its toll on Peter's mental health. He can't share his experiences with anyone who would truly understand them, can't seek advice about how to manage abilities that no one else possesses, can't even complain about the difficulties without revealing information that must remain hidden, Aunt May sees him struggling but attributes his problems to grief over Uncle Ben's death and the normal challenges of adolescence, not understanding that her nephew is carrying burdens that go far beyond anything a normal teenager faces. The temptation to reveal his secret identity to someone, anyone, who might be able to help him process what he's going through, grows stronger during moments of particular difficulty or loneliness. Betty Brant's kindness at the Daily Bugle makes Peter want to trust her with the truth, to have at least one person in his life who knows the complete story of who he is and what he's dealing with. But the memory of Uncle Ben's death, the understanding that people connected to Spider-Man become targets for his enemies, keeps Peter silent even when the isolation becomes almost unbearable. The relationship between Peter Parker and Spider-Man becomes increasingly complex as the months pass, the two identities developing different characteristics and serving different psychological functions. Peter Parker remains the awkward, grieving teenager trying to survive high school and help his aunt cope with their loss, constrained by all the normal limitations and social expectations that define adolescent life. Spider-Man is free from those constraints, able to express confidence and even humour through the anonymity of the mask, engaging with the world in ways that Peter Parker never could. The mask itself becomes psychologically significant, not just a tool for protecting Peter's secret identity, but a liberation from the social anxiety and self-consciousness that plague his civilian life. Behind the mask, Peter can make jokes during fights, can banter with the criminals he's apprehending, can express a personality that his shyness normally keeps hidden. The wisecracking, confident Spider-Man who swings through the city trading quips with villains bears little resemblance to the quiet, withdrawn Peter Parker, who barely speaks in class and eats lunch alone in the library. This division between his two identities serves important psychological functions, allowing Peter to compartmentalize his experiences and maintain some semblance of normal life despite his extraordinary circumstances. But it also creates internal tension as the gap between who he is as Peter and who he is as Spider-Man widens, making him feel increasingly fraudulent in both roles. The real Peter, whoever that might be, exists somewhere between these two personas, trapped in a space that neither fully represents but both partially express. The physical demands of his double life begin to show in ways that worry Aunt May and draw unwanted attention at school. Peter is always tired, dark circles under his eyes from too many late nights patrolling the city and too little actual sleep. His clothes hang loose on a frame that's burning calories faster than he can replace them despite eating constantly. His hands are sometimes bruised or scraped from fights that he can't explain without revealing his secret, injuries he dismisses as clumsiness or accidents that Aunt May accepts because she has no reason to suspect the truth. The academic consequences of his activities as Spider-Man become increasingly serious as the school year progresses. Peter's grades, once perfect, begin to slip as exhaustion and missed classes take their toll. Teachers who once considered him one of their best students start to express concern about his apparent lack of commitment, his frequent absences, his visible exhaustion during class. The guidance counselor calls him in for a meeting about his college prospects, warning him that his recent performance won't support applications to the kind of prestigious universities that seemed like certain destinations just months ago. Peter wants to care about these academic problems, understands intellectually that his education is important and that Uncle Ben would be disappointed to see him squandering his potential. But it's difficult to worry about test scores and college applications when he's spending his nights preventing robberies and assaults, when the choice is between studying for an exam and stopping someone from being hurt. The priorities that seemed so clear when his biggest concern was getting into a good school have been fundamentally reordered by his transformation and Uncle Ben's death, making the academic achievement that once defined his identity feel increasingly irrelevant. The financial strain of maintaining his activities as Spider-Man adds another layer of stress to Peter's already complicated life. The web fluid he uses in his shooters requires expensive chemicals that eat into the money he earns, from selling photographs to the Daily Bugle. The costume needs constant repair and occasional replacement as fabric tears and components wear out. The equipment he needs for his photography, cameras and film and developing supplies, requires investment that strains his limited resources. Every dollar he spends on Spider-Man-related expenses is a dollar that can't go toward helping Aunt May with household bills, creating guilt that compounds the other emotional burdens he's carrying. The evolution of Peter's understanding of his own biology continues through careful observation and occasional experimentation. He discovers that his enhanced abilities fluctuate based on his physical and emotional state, becoming stronger when he's well rested and properly fed, diminishing when he's exhausted or hungry or emotionally distressed. The spider sense in particular seems to be affected by his mental state, becoming less reliable when he's anxious or upset. The warnings harder to interpret through the noise of his own emotional turmoil. The question of whether his abilities might continue to develop or change over time haunts Peter's thoughts during quiet moments. The transformation that occurred during that first night after the spider bite was dramatic and seemingly complete. But who's to say that the process is entirely finished? Might new abilities emerge as his altered biology continues to stabilize and adapt? Could the powers he already possesses grow stronger with use and practice? Or might there be negative consequences he hasn't yet discovered, long-term effects of the radioactive exposure that could manifest in dangerous or debilitating ways? The lack of anyone to consult about these questions, the absence of medical professionals who could examine him without revealing his secret or scientific experts who could help him understand his transformation, leaves Peter conducting his own research with the limited resources available to a high school student. He reads everything he can find about radiation, genetics, and spider biology, trying to develop a theoretical framework that might explain what happened to him and predict what might happen in the future. The knowledge he gains is fragmentary and incomplete, raising more questions than it answers. But it provides some small comfort to apply his scientific training to understanding his own condition. The realization gradually settles over Peter that he's no longer entirely human in the conventional biological sense. The DNA that defines his species has been fundamentally altered, hybridized with arachnid genetic material in ways that shouldn't be possible according to everything science understands about cross-species genetics. He's become something new, something unique, a fusion of human intelligence and spider capabilities that has never existed before and might never exist again. This knowledge is both exhilarating and profoundly isolating, marking him as exceptional but also as alone in his exceptionality. As winter deepens and the first anniversary of Uncle Ben's death approaches, Peter finds himself reflecting on how much he's changed since that November day when everything began. The transformation initiated by the spider bite was biological, but the transformation completed by Uncle Ben's death was moral and psychological, reshaping not just his abilities, but his understanding of purpose and responsibility. The boy who wanted to use his powers to become rich and famous has become someone who accepts the burden of using those powers to protect others, who understands that the gifts he's been given come with obligations that supersede personal desires. The body that houses Peter Parker's consciousness is no longer fully human, enhanced and altered in ways that set him apart from everyone around him. But the heart that guides his choices, the moral framework instilled by Uncle Ben and Aunt May, remains fundamentally human in its commitment to compassion and justice, and the belief that power must be used responsibly. The spider bite gave him abilities, but it's his humanity. The lessons learned from the people who loved him, and the grief of losing them, that makes him a hero rather than just someone with powers. The friendly neighborhood Spider-Man who swings through Queens on cold winter nights is still learning, still making mistakes, still discovering the full implications of his transformation. But with each patrol, each criminal stopped, each person helped, Peter Parker grows more comfortable in the skin that's no longer quite human, more confident in his ability to use his gifts well, more committed to the mission that Uncle Ben's death set him on. The transformation that began with 8 legs worth of DNA is continuing, will always continue, as long as Peter chooses to honour the responsibility that comes with the power he never asked for, but now cannot imagine living without. The emergence of costumed criminals in New York City represents a fundamental shift in the nature of the threats that Spider-Man faces, transforming his mission from stopping ordinary muggers and burglars into confronting enemies whose abilities and resources match or exceed his own. The first time Peter encounters someone who can genuinely challenge his enhanced abilities, the understanding settles over him that his transformation into something beyond human was not unique, that the world contains others who possess extraordinary powers, and not all of them choose to use those powers for good. Dr. Otto Octavius represents everything that Peter fears he might have become if Uncle Ben's death hadn't taught him the lesson about responsibility. A brilliant scientist whose intellect rivals or surpasses Peter's own, Octavius is driven by ego and ambition rather than compassion, viewing his research as a path to personal glory rather than as a means of helping humanity. The accident that transforms him into Dr. Octopus occurs at a research facility, much like the one where Peter was bitten by the radioactive spider, a reminder that extraordinary abilities can arise from scientific mishaps, and that the same type of transformation can produce either a hero or a villain, depending on the character of the person transformed. The 4 mechanical arms that become fused to Octavius's body through the accident are marvels of engineering, responsive to his mental commands and possessing strength that exceeds even Peter's enhanced abilities. But the same radiation that gave Octavius control over these weapons also affected his mind, amplifying his natural arrogance and intellectual superiority into something approaching megalomania. The man who emerges from the accident is no longer interested in merely conducting research or publishing papers. He wants to prove his superiority over everyone he encounters, to demonstrate that his genius places him above normal rules and moral constraints. Peter's first confrontation with Dr. Octopus occurs during what should be a routine intervention in a robbery. Spider-Man swinging down to stop what appears to be a normal criminal breaking into a laboratory to steal equipment. But when the thief turns to face him, Peter sees not a frightened burglar, but a figure with 4 powerful mechanical arms emerging from his back, each appendage moving with fluid grace that seems almost alive. The surprise of the encounter costs Peter precious seconds, and Dr. Octopus uses those seconds to launch an attack that nearly ends Spider-Man's career before their rivalry truly begins. The mechanical arms move faster than anything Peter has fought before, striking from multiple directions simultaneously in coordinated patterns that his spider sense struggles to track and warn him about. Each arm possesses strength enough to crush steel, pincers sharp enough to cut through concrete, reach that allows Octopus to attack from distances that would be safe against a normal opponent. Peter finds himself dodging and retreating, unable to mount any effective offense against an enemy who can defend and attack from 4 directions at once, while his human arms work on whatever task brought him to the laboratory. The battle pushes Peter to his limits physically and tactically, forcing him to use every advantage his powers provide just to survive. His wall crawling allows him to fight from ceiling and walls, positions that most opponents can't easily attack, but the mechanical arms have their own mobility that makes vertical surfaces less of an advantage than usual. His spider sense warns him of attacks, but the sheer number of strikes coming from multiple directions means that avoiding one arm often puts him in position to be hit by another. His strength, usually more than sufficient to overpower normal criminals, proves barely adequate to resist the mechanical appendages when they grab him. The defeat, when it comes, is both humiliating and educational. Dr. Octopus manages to trap Peter in a grip that all 4 mechanical arms maintain simultaneously, pinning Spider-Man's limbs and making it impossible for him to leverage his strength effectively. Octavius could kill him in that moment, could crush the life out of the young hero with casual ease, but instead he chooses to lecture about superior intellect and the futility of opposing someone of his mental caliber. The monologue, delivered with the kind of pompous self-satisfaction that characterizes all of Octavius's interactions, gives Peter time to work one hand free and web the villain's face, creating enough distraction to escape the mechanical grip. Peter retreats from the battle not in triumph but in shameful flight, swinging away while Octopus's mocking laughter echoes behind him. The loss teaches him that good intentions and spider powers aren't enough to guarantee victory against determined opponents with their own advantages, that some enemies require strategy and preparation rather than just physical confrontation. He spends days analysing the fight, understanding what went wrong, developing tactics that might work better in their inevitable rematch. The mechanical arms have reach and strength, but they're still machines that follow predictable patterns, and Peter's spider sense should be able to track them if he's not overwhelmed by fighting reactively. The appearance of the lizard presents Peter with a different kind of challenge, an enemy who is simultaneously a threat and a victim deserving of compassion. Dr. Kurt Connors is everything that Otto Octavius is not. A good man driven by noble intentions to help amputees regenerate lost limbs, someone whose research is motivated by genuine desire to reduce human suffering rather than by ego or ambition. Peter encounters Connors during one of his visits to research facilities while trying to learn more about the kind of science that created both Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus, finding in the one-armed scientist a potential mentor and kindred spirit. The lizard DNA that Connors uses in his regeneration serum seems like a promising approach to solving a problem that affects millions of people, the loss of limbs through accident or disease creating disabilities that modern medicine can only partially address through prosthetics. But when Connors tests the serum on himself, desperate to prove that his years of research have produced something valuable, the transformation goes far beyond mere regeneration. His missing arm grows back, but the process doesn't stop there. His entire genetic structure beginning to rewrite itself to incorporate reptilian characteristics that override his human DNA. The creature that emerges when the transformation completes is barely recognizable as Kurt Connors, a massive reptilian humanoid with scales covering its body, a powerful tail, and the kind of predatory instincts that view humans as prey rather than as fellow sentient beings. The lizard retains fragments of Connor's intelligence, enough to be cunning and dangerous, but the human conscience and compassion that define the scientist have been submerged beneath reptilian drives and aggressive territoriality. The tragic irony of Connors' situation, that his attempt to help amputees has transformed him into something that threatens the very people he wanted to heal, creates moral complexity that Peter struggles to navigate. The first time Spider-Man encounters the lizard prowling through the sewers beneath New York, his initial instinct is to treat the creature as simply another villain to be stopped and turned over to the authorities. But something about the lizard's behaviour, moments when the reptilian eyes show flashes of human awareness and confusion, makes Peter hesitate. His research into Connors' background reveals the truth about the transformation, the understanding that this monster is actually a good man trapped in a body that no longer responds to his human will, fighting crime against himself from within. The confrontation with the lizard becomes not a battle to defeat an enemy, but a desperate attempt to save someone who deserves to be saved. To find a way to reverse the transformation and restore Kurt Connors to his human form, Peter's scientific knowledge becomes as important as his physical abilities in this fight, his understanding of chemistry and biology, allowing him to develop a potential antidote to the serum that created the lizard. The battle that follows is complicated by Peter's need to administer the cure, while also defending himself against an opponent whose strength and ferocity match his own, whose reptilian hide provides natural armour that Peter's punches barely affect. The moment when the antidote works, when the lizard's scales begin to fade and Kurt Connors' human form starts to emerge from the reptilian body, provides Peter with one of his first genuine victories as Spider-Man. Not just stopping a threat, but actually saving someone, helping a good man reclaim his humanity from a transformation he never intended. Connors, restored to himself but horrified by what he became and what he nearly did while transformed, provides Peter with a cautionary tale about the dangers of scientific ambition unchecked by proper caution and the thin line between helping and harming when working with forces we don't fully understand. The Rogues Gallery continues to expand as other costumed criminals emerge throughout New York, each representing different aspects of the threats that exist in a world where science and circumstance can create beings with abilities far beyond normal human limits. Adrian Toombs, the Vulture, is an elderly inventor whose flying harness allows him to soar through the skies and strike from above. His bitterness about being cheated by business partners transforming into a criminal career built on using his invention for theft and revenge rather than the legitimate success it could have brought him. Flint Marko, who becomes the Sandman after exposure to radioactive sand during a beach accident, possesses the ability to transform his body into sand, making him nearly impossible to capture through conventional means. His particles can flow through the smallest gaps, can reform after being scattered, can create shapes and weapons limited only by his imagination. Peter's first encounter with Sandman teaches him that some enemies can't be defeated through brute force, that creative problem-solving becomes essential when fighting opponents whose abilities make them immune to normal attacks. Max Dillon's transformation into Electro occurs through yet another industrial accident. This one involving high-voltage electrical equipment that should have killed him, but instead rewrote his biology to allow him to generate and control electricity. The living battery that Dillon becomes is dangerous in ways that terrify Peter, whose spider sense screams warnings about the electrical attacks, but can't protect him from energy that moves at the speed of light. Learning to fight Electro requires Peter to develop insulated webbing and ground himself properly. To understand electrical theory well enough to predict and counter an enemy whose powers operate according to physical laws that Peter needs to study and master. Each villain that Spider-Man faces teaches him something new about combat, strategy, or his own limitations. The Vulture's aerial mobility forces Peter to improve his web-swinging technique and develop tactics for fighting in 3 dimensions rather than just using buildings for support. Sandman's shape-shifting requires Peter to think creatively about solutions, eventually discovering that water can bind the sand particles and make Marko vulnerable to capture. Electro's electrical attacks push Peter to understand physics better, and to recognize that sometimes the best response to overwhelming power is not direct confrontation, but clever misdirection that makes the enemy's strength work against him. But the true test of everything Peter has learned comes when Dr. Octopus assembles 5 other villains into a coordinated team with a single purpose: destroying Spider-Man through overwhelming force and coordinated strategy. The formation of the Sinister Six represents a new level of threat, enemies working together to eliminate the hero who has frustrated all of their individual plans, combining their abilities in ways that should make victory impossible for a single opponent regardless of his powers. The 6 villains, Dr. Octopus, Electro, Kraven the Hunter, Mysterio, Sandman, and Vulture, devise a plan that seems foolproof in its simplicity. They'll challenge Spider-Man to face them one at a time in locations of their choosing, preventing him from using his mobility to avoid their attacks, and forcing him to fight consecutive battles that will wear him down through exhaustion if nothing else. Each villain will have home field advantage, fighting in an environment chosen to maximize their strengths and minimize Spider-Man's abilities. By the time he faces the 6th opponent, if he survives that long, he'll be too tired and injured to continue. The plan's elegance appeals to Dr. Octopus's sense of intellectual superiority, the mathematical certainty that 6 consecutive battles must eventually overwhelm even the most resilient opponent. What they don't account for is Peter's determination, the depth of his commitment to the responsibility he's accepted, the reserve of strength that comes not from his spider powers, but from his memory of Uncle Ben and the knowledge that innocent people depend on him to keep fighting regardless of the cost. The battles that follow test every aspect of Spider-Man's abilities and character, pushing him beyond limits he thought were absolute, and forcing him to discover reserves of endurance he didn't know he possessed. Against Electro, he must overcome his fear of the villain's electrical attacks, and find ways to ground himself safely while also staying mobile enough to avoid being hit. The insulated webbing he developed specifically for fighting Electro proves essential, allowing him to create grounding paths that channel the electrical energy away from his body, while he closes distance for physical attacks. Kraven, the hunter, forces Peter to match wits with one of the world's greatest trackers, someone who has spent his life studying predator-prey relationships and who views Spider-Man as the ultimate quarry. The battle takes place in an abandoned zoo, where Kraven has set traps and created hunting grounds that give him every advantage. Peter's spider sense warns him of the obvious traps, but not of the subtle ones. The psychological games that Kraven plays to make his prey doubt and second-guess. Victory comes not from overpowering the hunter, but from outwitting him, using Kraven's own assumptions about predatory behavior against him. Mysterio's illusions create a different kind of challenge, attacks that seem real but are actually projections, making Peter question his perceptions and doubt his spider sense when the warnings don't match the apparent threats. The master of special effects uses his Hollywood training to create scenarios that play on Spider-Man's fears and insecurities. Projections of Uncle Ben's death, visions of failing to save innocent people, nightmares made visible through technology. Peter must learn to trust his spider sense over his eyes, to distinguish between real threats that trigger genuine warnings and fake dangers that only appear threatening. By the time Peter faces Sandman, he's exhausted and injured, accumulating damage faster than even his enhanced healing can repair. The battle with Marco becomes a test of endurance, finding ways to continue fighting when his body is screaming for rest, when every movement hurts, when the easy choice would be to surrender and accept defeat. The water solution he discovered in their first encounter works again, but implementing it requires energy and focus that Peter barely possesses, forcing him to dig deep and find strength in his commitment to protecting others rather than in his failing physical reserves. The Vulture's aerial assault comes when Peter is at his lowest, barely able to stand, much less swing through the air in pursuit of a flying opponent. Tomb swoops and dives with practiced skill, staying just out of reach while launching attacks that Peter struggles to defend against. The wall-crawling abilities that usually give Peter an advantage become almost irrelevant when fighting someone who doesn't need surfaces to move, who can attack from any angle and retreat to heights where Peter can't follow. Victory requires Peter to lure Vulture close enough to ground level that webbing can entangle the flying harness, bringing the villain down where Spider-Man's superior strength can be brought to bear. The final confrontation with Dr. Octopus becomes a battle of intellects as much as strength. Two brilliant minds trying to outthink each other while also engaging in physical combat. Octavius expects to face an exhausted, injured opponent barely capable of standing, and Peter's condition certainly matches that expectation. But what the villain doesn't account for is the desperation of someone who has come too far to fail now, who has defeated 5 enemies consecutively and refuses to let the 6th claim victory. The mechanical arms give Octopus advantages in reach and striking power, but Peter's experience fighting them before provides knowledge about their patterns and limitations. The weakness Peter exploits is psychological rather than physical, using Octavius's arrogance and need to demonstrate superiority against him. By feigning greater exhaustion than he actually feels, by allowing Octopus to believe victory is certain, Peter creates openings that wouldn't exist if the villain took him seriously as a threat. The final move that ends the fight is simple, webbing all 4 mechanical arms simultaneously and using his strength to pull them together, binding them in a tangle of metal that Octavius's mental commands can't unravel quickly enough to prevent Spider-Man from webbing the villain himself into immobility. The victory over the Sinister Six marks a turning point in Peter Parker's career as Spider-Man, proving to himself and to his enemies that he's capable of facing multiple superpowered opponents and emerging victorious through skill, determination, and the moral strength that comes from fighting for something larger than himself. The battles leave him injured and exhausted, requiring days of recovery before he can return to his patrol routes, but they also leave him with confidence that he can handle whatever challenges the future brings. The lessons learned from fighting these first major villains become foundational to Peter's development as a hero. Each enemy teaches him something about strategy, about adapting to different types of threats, about the importance of preparation and intelligence in addition to physical abilities. Dr. Octopus teaches him about fighting opponents with reach advantages. The Lizard teaches him about compassion for enemies who are also victims. Electro teaches him about understanding the physics behind superpowers. Sandman teaches him about creative problem solving. The Vulture teaches him about fighting in 3 dimensions. The combined assault of the Sinister Six teaches him about endurance and the reserves of strength that commitment to a cause can unlock. But perhaps more importantly, these battles teach Peter about the nature of evil and the different paths that lead people to become villains. Some, like Dr. Octopus, are driven by ego and the belief that their intelligence places them above normal moral constraints. Others, like the Lizard, are good people transformed against their will into threats they never intended to become. Still others, like Sandman or Electro, are ordinary people who made bad choices or suffered accidents that gave them abilities they chose to use for selfish purposes rather than to help others. Understanding these different motivations helps Peter develop a more nuanced approach to heroism, recognizing that not every villain deserves the same response, that some can be reasoned with or saved, while others must simply be stopped and contained. The moral clarity of his early crime fighting, the simple division between good people and bad people, gives way to a more complex understanding of human nature, and the many factors that influence people's choices about how to use whatever power they possess. As the first year of Peter's career as Spider-Man draws to a close, the rogues gallery that will define his heroic mission has been established. The villains he's faced and defeated, each one a challenge that tested different aspects of his abilities and character, have proven that he's capable of handling threats that go far beyond ordinary crime. The friendly neighborhood Spider-Man has become something more significant, a hero who can stand against superpowered opponents and protect innocent people from dangers that the normal forces of law and order couldn't possibly handle. The boy who gained powers from a radioactive spider and learned about responsibility through tragedy has become a seasoned crime fighter, still young and still learning. But no longer the amateur who made so many mistakes in his early attempts at heroism. The transformation that began with a spider bite continues through every battle, every choice, every moment when Peter Parker decides to honor Uncle Ben's memory by using his power responsibly, no matter how difficult that choice becomes or how high the price of responsibility might be. The transition from high school to college represents a threshold that Peter Parker crosses with mixed feelings of hope and apprehension, leaving behind the familiar hallways of Midtown High, where he spent years being overlooked and bullied, stepping into the unknown territory of Empire State University, where he hopes to find both academic challenge and perhaps a fresh start socially. The acceptance letter from ESU arrives in early spring, bringing joy to Aunt May, who sees in Peter's educational opportunities the fulfillment of dreams that she and Uncle Ben held for their nephew. Proof that despite their modest circumstances, they've raised someone capable of achieving great things. Empire State University sits in Manhattan, a sprawling campus of modern buildings and historic halls that represent academic excellence and the kind of intellectual rigor that Peter has craved throughout his high school years. The science facilities are state-of-the-art. Laboratories equipped with equipment that makes his high school chemistry sets look like toys. Libraries filled with journals and texts that cover every aspect of scientific knowledge. For someone with Peter's curiosity and aptitude, the university represents a paradise of learning, opportunities to study with professors who are conducting cutting-edge research, to work alongside other students who share his passion for understanding how the world works. But the university also presents challenges that Peter hasn't fully anticipated. Social complexities and academic pressures that complicate his already difficult balancing act between his civilian life and his responsibilities as Spider-Man. The comfortable anonymity of high school, where he could disappear into the background and focus on his studies without anyone expecting much social engagement, gives way to an environment where students are expected to be more mature, more independent, more actively engaged with campus life and with each other. The awkward teenager who could hide in the library during lunch finds that college demands a more active participation in the social world. The financial pressures that have always shadowed the Parker household intensify with the costs of university education, tuition, and books and fees adding up to amounts that seem impossible given their limited resources. Peter's income from selling photographs to the Daily Bugle helps, but isn't sufficient to cover all the expenses, and Aunt May insists on contributing despite Peter's protest that she shouldn't sacrifice her own comfort and security for his education. She takes on extra work, cleaning houses and doing alterations for neighbours, her small frame bent over sewing or scrubbing, while Peter struggles with guilt about the burden his dreams place on the woman who has already given him so much. The scholarship and financial aid that Peter receives based on his academic record help make the university affordable, but they also come with expectations about maintaining high grades and demonstrating consistent achievement. The pressure to perform academically while also managing his responsibilities as Spider-Man creates stress that follows Peter through every class and every assignment. The knowledge that falling behind could cost him not just his education, but also the money that Aunt May has worked so hard to contribute. Peter's introduction to his college classmates comes through a series of chance encounters that will shape his relationships for years to come, connections formed in those first uncertain days when everyone is trying to find their place in this new environment. Harry Osborn enters Peter's life with the kind of casual confidence that comes from growing up with wealth and privilege. The son of Norman Osborn, who owns one of New York's most prominent chemical and manufacturing companies, Harry's first impression of Peter is curiosity mixed with something that might be condescension. Interest in this scholarship student who doesn't seem to care about impressing anyone or making connections with people who might be useful to his future. The friendship that develops between Peter and Harry is unlikely given their vastly different backgrounds and life experiences. Harry has grown up surrounded by luxury, attending private schools and travelling internationally, never worrying about money or whether his family could afford his education. Peter has grown up in a modest house in Queens, raised by an uncle who works multiple jobs and an aunt who stretches every dollar, accustomed to thinking carefully before spending even small amounts. Their worldview should be incompatible, their values too different to allow genuine friendship. But Harry possesses a hunger for authentic connection that his wealth and social position have made difficult to satisfy. Surrounded as he's always been by people who want something from him or his father, friendships that feel transactional rather than genuine, Peter's obvious disinterest in Harry's money and connections intrigues him, suggesting the possibility of a relationship built on actual affection rather than opportunistic calculation. When Harry offers to pay for lunch or provide rides in expensive cars, Peter's reluctance to accept creates tension, but also proves to Harry that this friendship might be real in ways his previous relationships have not been. The complexity of their friendship deepens as Peter struggles with accepting help from someone so much wealthier than himself, the pride and independence that Uncle Ben and Aunt May instilled, warring with the practical benefits that Harry's generosity could provide. Rides to campus save Peter time and energy that he desperately needs for his studies and his Spider-Man activities, but accepting them feels like taking charity from someone who doesn't understand what it's like to truly need help. Shared meals that Harry pays for without thinking twice represent expenses that Peter would have to budget carefully, creating an imbalance in their relationship that makes Peter uncomfortable, even as he appreciates Harry's friendship. Gwen Stacy enters Peter's awareness like sunlight breaking through clouds, a presence that illuminates everything around her with warmth and genuine kindness. She's beautiful in a classic way, blonde hair and bright smile, but it's her intelligence and character that truly capture Peter's attention. Gwen is studying biochemistry with the same passionate curiosity that drives Peter's scientific interests, her mind quick and analytical, capable of grasping complex concepts and contributing insights that enhance class discussions. But unlike many brilliant people, Gwen wears her intelligence lightly, never using it to make others feel inferior or to establish dominance in social situations. Their first real conversation happens in a chemistry class where they're assigned as lab partners, a pairing that seems random but feels like fate to Peter as he discovers someone who can match his enthusiasm for understanding molecular structures and reaction mechanisms. Gwen approaches their experiments with a combination of precision and creativity that Peter finds mesmerizing. Her careful attention to proper methodology balanced by willingness to consider unconventional approaches when standard procedures aren't producing expected results. Working beside her, watching her concentrate on measurements or analyze unexpected outcomes, Peter feels something unfamiliar stirring, an attraction that goes beyond simple physical appreciation to encompass admiration for her mind and spirit. But Peter's life as Spider-Man complicates any possibility of romance with Gwen or anyone else, his frequent disappearances and mysterious injuries creating barriers to the kind of intimacy that relationships require. When he misses study sessions because Spider-Man is needed to stop a robbery, when he arrives late to social gatherings with bruises he can't explain, when his attention seems to drift even during conversations because his spider sense is warning him about danger somewhere in the city, Gwen notices these things with the perceptive intelligence that makes her such an excellent student. She doesn't press him for explanations he clearly can't or won't provide, but Peter can see the questions in her eyes, the concern mixed with confusion about what secrets he's keeping. Captain George Stacy, Gwen's father, adds another layer of complexity to Peter's growing feelings for his daughter. George Stacy is a police captain whose dedication to justice and public service mirrors Peter's own commitment to protecting innocent people, a career law enforcement officer who has spent decades working to make New York safer while maintaining his integrity in the face of corruption and compromise. When Peter meets Captain Stacy for the first time at a dinner, Gwen invites him to. He finds himself wanting to impress this man not just as Gwen's potential boyfriend, but as someone who shares Stacy's values about service and responsibility. The captain's professional interest in Spider-Man creates ironic situations where Peter finds himself discussing his own activities with someone whose analytical mind and investigative experience allow him to develop surprisingly accurate theories about the wall-crawler's methods and motivations. Stacy doesn't view Spider-Man with the hostility that J. Jonah Jameson promotes, instead seeing the masked hero as someone trying to help in ways that traditional law enforcement cannot, filling gaps in the system that need to be addressed even if the methods are unconventional. His respect for Spider-Man's effectiveness and apparent moral code provides Peter with validation from an authority figure whose judgment he trusts. Even though Stacy doesn't know he's praising Peter Parker rather than some unknown vigilante. Flash Thompson's presence at Empire State University on a football scholarship creates continuity with Peter's high school experiences, while also highlighting how much both young men have grown and changed. The university environment doesn't eliminate Flash's tendency toward bullying and social dominance, but it does moderate these behaviours somewhat as the more mature social expectations of college life make his high school tactics less effective. The dynamic between Peter and Flash becomes more complex as they both mature. Flash's hero worship of Spider-Man continuing and even intensifying, while his antagonism toward Peter Parker gradually softens into something more like casual rivalry than active cruelty. The irony of Flash's relationship with both Peter Parker and Spider-Man reaches its peak when Flash starts a Spider-Man fan club on campus, organising events and discussions celebrating the masked hero, while remaining completely unaware that he's praising the same person he spent years tormenting. Peter finds himself in the surreal position of listening to Flash enthusiastically defend Spider-Man's methods and character to anyone who will listen, arguing passionately against Jameson's editorials and collecting newspaper clippings of the wall-crawler's exploits. The situation would be funny if it weren't also painful, a reminder of how perception shapes reality, and how the same person can be simultaneously despised and admired depending on which face he shows to the world. The academic challenges of university courses prove to be both stimulating and overwhelming for Peter as he tries to maintain the kind of grades his scholarship requires, while also managing his responsibilities as Spider-Man. The professors at Empire State University are conducting actual research rather than just teaching from textbooks, pushing their students to think critically and engage with cutting-edge developments in their fields. Peter thrives in this intellectual environment when he's able to give it his full attention, his natural brilliance allowing him to grasp concepts that other students struggle with, his curiosity driving him to read beyond assigned materials and explore topics that interest him. But the nights spent patrolling the city as Spider-Man, the emergencies that require him to miss classes or leave study sessions abruptly, the exhaustion from fighting criminals while also trying to complete assignments. And all of these factors undermine Peter's ability to perform at the level his intelligence should allow. Professors who initially recognized his potential begin to express concern about his inconsistent attendance and apparent lack of commitment, unable to understand why someone so obviously gifted seems to be squandering his opportunities through poor time management and unreliability. The first major crisis of Peter's college career comes when Aunt May suffers a serious health emergency, collapsing at home from what doctors initially suspect might be a heart attack. The call that summons Peter from campus to the hospital triggers every fear and guilt he's carried since Uncle Ben's death. The terror of losing another person who matters more to him than his own life. The knowledge that Aunt May's stress from working too hard to support his education might have contributed to her current crisis. He sits beside her hospital bed watching the monitors track her vital signs, holding her hand and making promises to himself about being more careful with her health and happiness if only she recovers. The diagnosis reveals that May's condition is serious but treatable, a combination of stress and overwork that has weakened her system and created symptoms that mimic more dangerous cardiac events. The medication she needs is expensive, part of a treatment regimen that will require ongoing costs that the family's limited insurance coverage doesn't fully address. The financial burden of May's medical care adds another layer of pressure to Peter's already strained resources, creating situations where he must choose between buying textbooks he needs for classes and ensuring Aunt May has the prescriptions that maintain her health. The desperate search for ways to pay for Aunt May's treatment leads Peter into one of his most challenging moral dilemmas when he considers returning to his earlier career as Spider-Man the Entertainer, using his powers for personal profit in ways he swore he would never do again after Uncle Ben's death. The money from television appearances and endorsements could solve all of their financial problems easily, could ensure that Aunt May receives the best possible medical care without the constant stress about costs. But the thought of using his abilities for personal gain makes Peter physically ill. The memory of his earlier selfishness and its consequences making it impossible to consider that path even when the stakes are so high. The solution comes through increased dedication to his photography work for the Daily Bugle, taking more risks to capture more dramatic shots of Spider-Man in action, selling every photo he can produce to bring in money that, while earned through his Spider-Man activities, doesn't feel like the same kind of moral compromise as performing for entertainment. The line Peter draws between these two uses of his powers might seem arbitrary to an outside observer, but to him it represents an important distinction between documenting newsworthy events and deliberately creating spectacle for profit. The relationship between Peter and Mary Jane Watson begins as something he actively resists. Aunt May's attempts to set them up on a blind date met with Peter's firm refusal, based on his assumption that any girl his elderly aunt considers suitable must be boring and conventional. Mary Jane exists in Peter's awareness as a name that Aunt May mentions frequently, the niece of a neighbour who is visiting New York and who Peter really should meet because they would get along so well. The more Aunt May pushes, the more Peter resists, protecting his limited free time from what he assumes will be an awkward encounter with someone who has nothing in common with his complicated life. The universe has other plans, and Mary Jane makes her entrance into Peter's life at a moment calculated for maximum impact. The famous panel that will define her character shows a vibrant young woman with red hair and confidence that radiates from every gesture. Her greeting of, "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot," capturing both her self-assurance and her understanding that she represents something Peter didn't expect and doesn't quite know how to handle. She's beautiful, but not in the sweet, wholesome way that Gwen embodies. Her beauty edged with sophistication and a hint of danger that suggests complexity beneath the party girl exterior. Mary Jane represents a completely different vision of what Peter's romantic life could be compared to the possibility that Gwen offers. Where Gwen is sincere and straightforward in her affections, Mary Jane maintains emotional distance through humour and deflection, approaching relationships as fun rather than as serious commitments. Where Gwen wants to understand Peter's secrets and help him carry his burdens, Mary Jane seems content to accept his mysterious absences without demanding explanations, her own secrets and evasions creating a symmetry in their relationship that feels both comfortable and somehow hollow. The triangle that forms between Peter, Gwen, and Mary Jane creates tension that Peter is completely unprepared to navigate, his inexperience with romantic relationships leaving him uncertain how to handle the attention of two remarkable women who represent such different possibilities for his future. Gwen's sincere affection and desire for a serious relationship appeals to the part of Peter that craves stability and genuine connection, the possibility of sharing his life with someone who truly knows and accepts him. Mary Jane's vibrancy and apparent lack of serious expectations appeals to the part of Peter that's overwhelmed by responsibility and obligation, offering the promise of fun and excitement without the weight of commitment. The college years become a time of growth and exploration for Peter as he navigates academic challenges, develops important friendships, experiences his first serious romantic feelings, and continues to evolve as Spider-Man. The boy who entered Empire State University still grieving Uncle Ben's death and uncertain about his place in the world begins to emerge as someone with clearer sense of purpose and identity, even as new complications and challenges arise to test his character and commitment. The foundation laid during these years will support him through trials to come. Relationships formed now will shape his future in ways he cannot anticipate, and lessons learned through success and failure will prepare him for the responsibilities and tragedies that await him as he moves from youth toward adulthood. And so, we come to the end of our journey through the most profound transformation in Peter Parker's life, the moment when a single spider bite changed everything and set in motion a story about power, responsibility, and what it truly means to be a hero. We've walked alongside Peter from his quiet life in Queens through the discovery of abilities he never asked for, through the terrible lesson that taught him what those abilities were meant to serve, through the early struggles of learning to use power wisely and well. The story of Spider-Man's transformation is ultimately a story about all of us, about the moments when life changes in ways we cannot control and the choices we make in response to those changes. Peter Parker gained extraordinary abilities, but the real transformation came not from the spider bite, but from his decision to honour Uncle Ben's memory by accepting the responsibility that comes with power. That choice, made in grief and guilt and love, defined everything that followed. As you drift towards sleep, let yourself remember that heroes are not born from accidents or abilities, but from the courage to keep trying despite failures, the compassion to care about others even when it costs us dearly, the wisdom to understand that true strength comes not from what we can do, but from what we choose to do. The web that Spider-Man swings on connects us all, reminding us that our choices matter, that responsibility is not a burden, but a gift, that ordinary people can choose to do extraordinary things. Rest now and dream of possibilities, of transformations that bring not just power but purpose, of the understanding that with great power comes